At exactly 3:20 a.m. on August 28, 2025, a Bayan M warship belonging to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, worth nearly $80 million, was docked at Military Pier Number 2 in Temriuk Bay, an inland area considered by Moscow to be untouchable, more than 65 miles from the Ukrainian front line. The vessel had just returned from a strategic caliber strike mission and was now in resupply mode, refueling, activating the cooling system, and especially reloading 8 caliber NK cruise missiles, each worth over $1 million, with a range of more than 950 miles, capable of reaching any city in Ukraine. On the deck, a group of officers was gathered, raising vodka glasses to celebrate the recently completed mission. The combat crew was rotating rest shifts. Some had fallen asleep at control stations. No one knew that just over 6 miles away, a high-speed boat bearing civilian markings was silently gliding across the water, slowly approaching the bay. From the outside, the speedboat looked like a regular fishing vessel, but inside the cockpit were 2 Ukrainian soldiers from the 73rd Naval Center, dressed in fishing jackets and Russian-style fisherman caps. Behind them, in the storage compartment, where there should have been styrofoam boxes filled with squid and herring, were 2 Beaver model FPV suicide drones, heavy configuration, equipped with 8-pound armor-piercing warheads, night vision cameras, and internal navigation systems independent of GPS. And in less than 5 minutes, that small boat would become the mobile launch pad for one of the boldest naval attacks Ukraine had ever carried out, right in the middle of a zone fully controlled by Russia. The Bayan M warship is a compact but extremely dangerous war machine. Unlike massive ships that carry helicopters and heavy air defense systems, the Bayan M is designed for narrow inland waters like the Caspian or Azov, but still capable of striking nearly any target in Ukraine. Each time this ship leaves Temriuk port, considered the cocoon of Russia's Azov fleet, cities like Kyiv, Lviv, or Odessa face new uncertainty. No one knows what the next target will be: a power grid, a fuel depot, or a kindergarten. Ukraine knew this well, and they decided not to wait for the next launch. They would strike first. The defense system around Temriuk port, where the warship was docked, was extremely dense. This was no ordinary port, but a floating air defense fortress. A Panzer S-1 system, specialized in intercepting UAVs and cruise missiles, 2 Podlet K-1 radar stations on active duty 24/7. This meant every layer of armor was active. Any unknown object that appeared would be shot down almost immediately. And so, the Russian Navy believed Temriuk Bay was a steel nest, where no UAV could get close. But that was a fatal mistake, because Ukraine had calculated the exact timing and chosen a method the enemy wouldn't expect: skimming the sea surface, the radar blind zone, a gap so narrow it seemed harmless. But from that very place, death approached silently, with the weapon Russia least expected: a UAV costing just 1/500th of a caliber missile. At exactly 3:27 a.m., when the boat was just 3 miles from the target, right on the outer edge of Temriuk port's surveillance ring, the 2 Ukrainian soldiers in the cockpit moved quickly. They removed the gray camouflage tarps covering the back compartment. From beneath, 2 FPV drones emerged. Each drone was about 4 feet long, with a wingspan of 5.5 feet, the body made of fiberglass composite, ultralight, low thermal signature, matte gray to blend in with the sea. As soon as everything was ready, the 2 soldiers pulled the safety pins, activated the internal navigation modules, and pressed arm and release. The 2 UAVs were deployed using an independent dual strike model, 2 approach vectors, 2 separate targets, fully synchronized in time and tactics. The first, codenamed Hram, Thunder, controlled by the primary group, was programmed to fly directly toward the surveillance radar tower to disable the main radar system, temporarily blinding the Russian warship. The second, codenamed Vidplata, Retribution, operated by HUR Special Operations Forces, would follow from a 30-degree offset on the right flank and strike the Kaliber missile launcher amidships, which held all 8 Kaliber NK cruise missiles. If Hrom succeeded in blinding the radar, Vidplata would have the chance to pierce the final armor layer and strike at the heart of the warship, where not only the missiles were stored, but also the fire control command center. At exactly 3:29 minutes and 12 seconds AM, the first UAV was pushed off the launch rail at the stern of the boat. In just 3 seconds, the high-speed electric propeller activated, the UAV accelerated and took off, flying just above the water's surface. The second drone followed 40 seconds later. Both UAVs flew approximately 200 feet apart, at an altitude of no more than 7 feet, low enough to slip beneath the scanning angles of the Podlet and Pantsir radars. From that moment on, the boat had completed its mission. Everything that followed was entirely in the hands of 2 unmanned killing machines, guided by internal navigation algorithms, inertial sensors, and infrared cameras. Inside a control bunker near the city of Zaporizhzhia, a UAV operator from the primary unit stared intently at a black and white FPV screen. Everything around him was dead silent. Only the dim glow of the monitor illuminated his tense, motionless face. The radar tower loomed on the screen, a near-perfect target. The operator held his breath. The Hrom drone was closing in, just a few hundred feet to go. The distance readout showed 950 feet, then 800, then 650. Still no reaction from the Russian vessel. Its radar kept rotating, unaware of the incoming threat. The operator tightened his grip on the control stick. The countdown began. 5 seconds. 4, 3. In that instant, everything went still. At exactly 3:31 minutes and 25 seconds AM, a bright flash erupted directly on the main radar mast, followed by a white plume slicing across the deck. Flames burst out on both sides like massive welding torches. Shrapnel scattered, splashing into the sea like fireworks. Just 0.7 seconds after Hrom struck, the entire surveillance and navigation system of the Bayan M simultaneously shut down. The main antenna was ripped from its rotation shaft and flung across the deck. The signal transmitter shorted out, sending sparks into the equipment compartment. The explosion's heat singed auxiliary sensor clusters. The central data processor, shielded by EMI protection, was completely knocked out. The Bayan M, once a powerful long-range strike platform, was now in a state of temporary tactical blindness. The ship's commander immediately gave the order, "Run a fast diagnostic on the sensors, possible electronic warfare attack." But the responses were hopeless. Main radar, completely destroyed. Bayan M now had only one hope of survival. The Pantsir S-1 close-in defense system with an engagement range of 2.5 to 3.5 miles, but it had to be activated manually by the crew. However, after Hrom's strike, the control center had been destroyed and cabin temperatures surged, making it impossible to trigger the support defense system. Part of the composite shell on the command tower was ripped open, allowing sea wind and carbon dust from the blast to pour in. A radar officer was critically injured. A shard from the antenna penetrated the observation window and struck his left chest. Within less than 10 seconds, the entire defense crew was thrown into chaos, losing command capability temporarily. And this still wasn't the end. Now the real threat arrived from an angle no one anticipated. At 3:31 minutes and 25 seconds AM, just 6 seconds after the first strike. From the port side, a small gray object skimmed the surface at nearly 95 miles per hour, heading directly for the Kaliber launcher section amidships. It was Vidplata, Ukraine's FPV drone known as Retribution. Vidplata's target was the center deck, where the 3 S-14 vertical launch system was located, housing up to 8 Kaliber NK cruise missiles. In the auxiliary control room, a watch officer shouted, "Low-level object approaching, port side," but it was already too late. The radar was down. The optical camera was obscured by burned dust. The Pantsir battery had not been ordered to fire. The command crew was still trying to reboot the system. The Boyan M was now completely exposed to the second strike. The FPV feed from Vidplata captured every launch bay clearly, rectangular hatches painted in matte grayish-green, protruding from the deck like flat horizontal chimneys arranged in parallel rows along the ship's center line. Heat signatures were visible from at least 2 launch covers. One of them, bay number 3, had its hatch open, exposing part of a Caliber NK already in pre-launch mode. That was the critical point Vidplata had been programmed to hit. It immediately veered in from the port side, approaching at a 25-degree angle relative to the ship's longitudinal axis. Exactly 3:32 a.m., Vidplata slammed straight into Launch Bay 3. A powerful explosion blew the hatch clean off. A thick column of black smoke shot dozens of feet into the air. The blast tore apart part of the center deck, steel plating bent, metal fragments scattered like shrapnel. Immediately after impact, the ship's internal fire suppression system activated. Carbon dioxide valves popped open along the deck. Compressed gas was sprayed in bursts to extinguish flames and reduce heat. But it was already too late. Fire spread into the secondary electrical bay. The launch control module was incinerated. The 2 adjacent launch bays overheated rapidly. The risk of a secondary explosion couldn't be ruled out. And above all, the ship had completely lost its combat capability. After the blast, the vessel began tilting 3 to 5 degrees to the right, a clear sign of internal imbalance or a flooded technical compartment. Crew members rushed to inspect the deck. Emergency valves were sealed. The entire defense system was switched to manual mode. The ship did not sink, but at this point, it had lost all defensive and offensive capability. The UHF band internal military communications channel of the Black Sea Fleet received the message, Boyan M warship B-38 attacked, radar damaged, Caliber system damaged, requesting support and tow back to Temriuk. Less than 7 minutes after the dual strike, the Boyan M had completely lost its combat capability and was forced to withdraw from its active post in Temriuk Bay. The Boyan M serves as Russia's main strike platform in the Sea of Azov. Due to the sea's semi-enclosed, shallow water and narrow channel terrain, only small-class ships like the Boyan M can operate effectively, evading enemy radar while launching long-range cruise missiles. And now, at least one has been knocked out of the fight. Just hours after the attack, Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate released UAV footage clearly showing the first strike hit the radar, destroying the top of the mast. Seconds later, a second drone slammed into the center deck. Flames erupted. The ship tilted noticeably. No air defense response was observed. Trusted outlets such as Naval News, Kyiv Post, Business Insider, and the Kyiv Independent all confirmed the video's authenticity. According to independent naval experts, the FPV drone attack on the Boyan M warship not only caused direct material damage, but also had immediate strategic consequences across the Sea of Azov. After the attack, the Boyan M was forced to return to its naval base in Sevastopol for assessment and repairs. The process is expected to take at least several weeks, depending on the extent of the damage and the recoverability of its digital infrastructure. For Ukraine, this was a clean tactical victory, achieved at less than 1% the cost of the target, yet with an impact that could shift the balance of power for days or even weeks. The strike dealt a blow to the confidence Russia's navy once had in the supposed safe zone of the Azov interior. To the Russian command, this was the calm rear area, where warships could dock, reload, and prepare Caliber strikes without fear of pursuit. But reality has just proven the opposite. 2 FPV drones, launched from a disguised speedboat, not only penetrated a multi-million-dollar air defense system, but struck the 2 most critical vulnerabilities of a warship, its radar and missile launch system. And this wasn't the first time a Russian warship had been hit by improvised drones. Back in late 2024, Ukrainian special forces used improvised UAVs to disable a Sergei Kotov-class patrol boat off the Crimean coast, forcing it to remain docked for repairs. That same year, A Cesar Kunikov-class landing ship was completely sunk during a drone-based amphibious strike. More recently, in July 2025, Ukraine deployed a sea-launched FPV drone for the first time to strike an offshore oil rig near Crimea used by Russia as a radar station, a move Western analysts described as a turning point in asymmetric warfare. These are no longer desperate ramming attacks, but well-executed operations, with planning, rehearsal, and synchronized timing, using small, inexpensive weapons that know how to exploit blind spots, hit at the right moment, and strike the right target. It's not that each individual UAV deals a fatal blow. Rather, it's the intelligent, coordinated, and unconventional use of them that has turned these drones into the Russian Navy's strategic nightmare of the 21st century. From this point forward, any Russian vessel operating in the area, whether it's a Bayan-M, a Cerna-class, or a logistics ship, must now face the ever-present threat of UAVs that cost less than $2,000 apiece. At exactly 3:10 a.m., 21st September 2025, a Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 reconnaissance drone had locked onto a distinct, deep-origin signal inside enemy territory. A dual heat signature appeared, clear and sharp. The AI targeting suite auto-flagged it. Two Russian Mi-8 Amtesh helicopters, each valued at roughly $16 million, had just touched down at an airbase on the Crimean Peninsula. In the underground UAV operations room in Zaporizhzhia, the sensor crew went nearly silent. Tension climbed. "Opportunity!" someone breathed. One precise strike, and it would not be just two helicopters. The entire local supply chain would be crippled. Both Mi-8s had completed a flight of nearly 2 hours, carrying over 60 troops and their kit away from the front. On touchdown, they were driven straight into the technical area for routine maintenance and refueling. On the ramp, the mood was relaxed. Officers sloughed off flight suits and gloves, laughed aloud, poured a few plastic cups of vodka, and toasted a flawless sortie. They did not know that the flight they treated as routine was the breadcrumb that would give Ukraine the base's exact coordinates. Like the sugar cube and the ant game, Ukraine needed one sugar cube to lure the ant home, then burn the whole nest. At 3:20 a.m., minutes after the two Mi-8s landed, screens at the GOR command center in Zaporizhzhia began to flash. Commercial infrared satellite imagery had captured the heat signature on the ramp where aircraft engines were still glowing hot. A Bayraktar TB2, reconnaissance UAV patrolling outside the corridor, was retasked immediately. It descended to 1,650 feet, skimmed the terrain, and slipped into the blind sector that Nebo-U and Podlet K-1 could not cover. Its composite airframe made its radar return resemble a small bird. It was nearly invisible on the enemy's scopes. Its electro-optical and infrared sensors traced the residual engine heat from the Mi-8s. Video relayed to the UAV command in Zaporizhzhia showed the truth. This was no temporary parking strip. At least two Mi-8s were staged for redeployment. Two B-12 served maritime reconnaissance. Behind them sat a cluster of Nebo-U antennas capable of detecting low observable aircraft and tracking hundreds of targets at once. Human intelligence reported hundreds of tons of fuel and ammunition in the hangars and storage yards, enough to sustain continuous air operations, prolong pressure on Ukraine's defenses, and keep lines of supply open. If the base were neutralized, the enemy would lose a critical node. A strategic blind spot would open. Early warning capability would be degraded. The logistics chain would fracture. Air defense effectiveness would fall, and pathways would open for follow-on Ukrainian strikes. The Ghost Special Task Unit moved at once. They escalated from surveillance to a 3-layered strike plan. A UAV formation that had been covertly deployed for nearly 2 hours received the order to change course and enter the final corridor. At 3:25 a.m., the formation was now less than 25 miles from the target. Leading were two UJ-22 airborne decoy UAVs flying at 985 feet with a cruise speed of about 100 miles per hour. They were unarmed. Their sole job was to emit strong signals and jam the 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz bands. With carbon fiber skins and larger than normal airframes, they did not hide from the enemy radar. They were built to be the first targets. Exactly 656 feet behind them, 3 Liuti AN-196 attack UAVs followed as the main strike. They flew lower at approximately 490 feet, maintaining cruise speeds of 112 to 124 miles per hour. Each carried a 165-pound shaped charge warhead. The formation flew in an arrow formation. They emitted no signals. All guidance ran on an internal navigation suite, fully GPS independent. The objective was the military airbase in Crimea. Coordinates had been confirmed less than 5 minutes earlier. From launch, the formation sent no control traffic on open bands. Every move matched the rehearsal script to the second. At 3:27 a.m., the two UJ-22 decoys penetrated the first air defense recognition zone. A Podlet K-1 station more than 12.5 miles from the airfield began to pick up anomalous contacts in the mid-altitude layer. Warning indicators started flashing. Radar operators increased scan frequency. The Nebo-U switched to active mode. High-frequency cones began sweeping in widening arcs. The UJ-22 signatures sharpened. On the Podlet K-1 control display, 2 unknown targets appeared repeatedly at 900 to 1,000 feet altitude, about 11.5 miles from the airfield, closing fast. Unknown response code. The alert station's initial assessment, a loitering or reconnaissance kamikaze UAV preparing to strike. The local air defense commander ordered Condition 1 immediately. The Nebo-U turned hard and switched to high-rate scanning. A Pantsir S-1 battery on the airfield's eastern perimeter went live. 2 57E6 rounds were launched at once. It took 14 seconds to intercept. 2 flashes lit the sky. Fireballs bloomed. UAV wreckage hit open ground less than 1,650 feet from the airfield fence. A duty officer in the command cabin reported, "Clear, both neutralized." Air defenses dropped to temporary alert level. Podlet reverted to routine patrol mode. Nebo-U kept sweeping but throttled back scan frequency on the southeast axis. None of them knew the real phase of the operation had only just begun. At 3:30 minutes and 42 seconds a.m., as the Nebo-U swung its beam northwest, the 3 Liuti AN-196s pressed deeper toward the base. The lead aircraft made a shallow 10-degree break off the original axis. The 2 wing elements held formation and cut altitude below 330 feet, skimming the low tree line on the base's southern edge. All 3 slipped into the gap that had opened between radar sweeps, while the air defense units recalibrated after the first volley. The maneuver was pre-calculated to route through the intersecting nulls of 2 sweep arcs. A razor-thin window created by fragmented side lobes. It was just wide enough to transit and exit before Russian radars could relock. This is radar evasion craftsmanship. It has allowed Ukrainian UAVs to reach Moscow, Kazan, and as far as Astrakhan on the Caspian shore. While the Pantsir crews re-zeroed after the initial shots, the dagger tip had already pierced the outer defensive layer. Distance to the base fell below 10 miles. At current cruise speeds, the formation would reach the target in under 5 minutes. From this point, every flight control input exploited beam rotation timing, and the Pantsir S-1 reaction lag after engaging the decoys. 2 minutes later, the 3 UAVs entered the attack corridor together. Range coordinator confirmed. Liuchi units have entered the attack corridor. Lock heading, Crimea base, Mi-8 cluster, B-12s, Nebo-U. Infrared on the control screens showed it clearly. 2 Mi-8s parked exposed, 2 B-12s at the hangar edge, the radar cluster uncamouflaged. The airfield had not yet grasped the true threat. It was at their feet, ground-hugging, and locking 3 lethal nodes. At 3:33 minutes and 45 seconds a.m., Nebo-U registered a faint return at ultra-low altitude. A dim heat band appeared on the screen edge. The sector coordinator warned, "Low-level contact, accelerating. Alert Level 2 triggered too late. Inside the control center, Ukrainian engineers armed the final dive mode. Automatic terminal dives locked to the pre-designated aim points. All three Lyuty accelerated into terminal run. Their final sprint reached 145 to 155 miles per hour. With fuselage length about 5 feet and wingspan 7 feet, and a carbon composite frame to cut weight and radar cross-section, these UAVs are optimized for surprise strikes, where a single hit can trigger cascading destruction. 30 seconds later, Lyuty-1 began a pull-up to 600 feet. Target: the Mi-8 cluster on the west ramp, still exposed. Lyuty-2 peeled off the formation, banked 15 degrees left, and locked on the Nebo-U antenna. Thermal data showed the 45-foot antenna array rotating slowly with no intercept vector declared. Lyuty-3 held course and locked on the two B-12s parked side by side at the east ramp near maintenance and refueling trucks. Behind those objective nodes lay an expeditionary fuel dump with over 1,100,000 pounds of aviation fuel and distributed ammunition caches laid out for dispersed operations. Countdown: 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. The blast. The clock read 3:35 minutes and 23 seconds a.m. Lyuty-1 approached on a 26-degree angle and slammed into the Mi-8 Amch's engine bay while the helicopter was under maintenance. The impact flashed white, then detonated into a fireball over 330 feet high that lit the entire base instantly. The shaped charge blast and the Mi-8's secondary explosion cooked the surrounding fuel drums. Peak overpressure exceeded 50 pounds per square inch. The blast propagated into Mi-8 No. 2, parked 15 feet away. Both Mi-8s were shredded, fuselage sections ripped apart. Rotor blades flew more than 230 feet, landing on an adjacent hangar roof. A refuel truck was hurled away. Fires spread violently. 0.8 seconds later, Lyuty-3 struck the right-hand B-12. The B-12's airframe tore open. Debris punctured the auxiliary fuel bunker. The second B-12 ignited in the ensuing chain explosion. Flames leapt from wing to fuselage and into the maintenance bay. At 3:35 minutes and 27 a.m., Lyuty-2, with surgical precision, drove straight into the Nebo-U main antenna array. A dry, violent detonation ripped the night apart. Russia's eye was neutralized. The radar collapsed into a burning heap of twisted metal. The concussion echoed across a radius greater than 12.5 miles. Locals later said they thought an earthquake struck. Warehouse windows inside 1,970 feet shattered. The ramp became a torch. The covert airbase turned into an inferno. Commercial IR satellites showed a thermal bloom over 1,320 feet at the Crimea command site. At 3:36 minutes a.m., Russia's UHF net sent its last message. Base under attack, radar damaged, aircraft damaged, requesting immediate assistance. Then silence. In under 7 minutes, the strategic air base in Crimea lost all defensive and air control capability and burned out. From radar to the Mi-8 cluster, the entire west ramp was incinerated. Fires climbed high. Black smoke trailed for hundreds of meters. Blast pressure extended into warehouses nearly 1,970 feet away. Within 2 minutes of the impacts, at least 7 secondary detonations occurred: fuel burns and pool fires, serial detonations in B-12 munitions bunkers, a backup command vehicle destroyed by blast overpressure. At 4:15 a.m., commercial IR satellites logged a high-intensity hotspot in West Crimea with a luminous area exceeding 350 square meters. Telegram clips from Jankoy residents circulated showing large night fires, hot metal fragments raining on roofs, and military police sealing the scene. Maxar imagery on the morning of 21st September showed the damage plainly. 3 Mi-8s charred to frames. 1 B-12 mangled beyond recognition. Nebo-U radar collapsed, its antenna broken and inert. Ramp blackened across more than 984 feet. debris, scorch marks, and smoke plumes visible from orbit. Estimated damage exceeded $180 million. The base lost 100% of its helicopter lift, its primary early warning radar, expeditionary fuel stocks, and ammunition. Logistical operations halted. Strategic effect for Ukraine, decisive. This base was not a generic staging strip. It was one of the few remaining expeditionary airfields in central Crimea. Russia used it to redeploy attack helicopters, operate B-12 maritime patrols, and run resupply flights to forward hubs in Kherson and Jankoy, critical nodes in the operational logistics chain. With the base neutralized, Moscow must rework southern logistics. Cargo flights will reroute further away. Transit times increase. Detectability rises. Jankoy's air defense radar no longer has compensating coverage, creating a 90-kilometer blind sector to the west that Ukraine can exploit in follow-on operations. Ukraine forced Russian defenses to move, disperse, and reveal gaps. Each such response creates new targeting options for GUR and Ukraine's UAV forces. Moscow's Ministry of Defense remained silent for hours. Telegram channels posted vague lines. A technical fire occurred in Crimea, cause under investigation. OSINT analysts quickly verified coordinates with thermal imagery. The struck area was exposed in before and after mosaics. The once hidden base coordinates were now fully revealed. Operation Ghost was not merely a UAV strike, it was a preemptive, punitive blow that shattered a key defensive node in Crimea. The Nebo-U's removal erased early warning on the northwest axis of the peninsula. The Mi-8 lift cluster used for troop redeployments and fast assault was knocked out. The B-12 maritime reconnaissance capability was degraded. Fuel and ammunition caches were destroyed, grounding Jankoy air activity for 48 hours. Immediately after the strike, Russia was forced to seal off the base perimeter, deploy additional Podlet K-1 air defense assets, suspend all low-level flight operations in the area. With 3 low-flying UAVs, Ukraine turned an invulnerable base into rubble. The message was clear: in modern war, timing and tactics can outweigh expensive kit. At exactly 1 a.m. local time, on September 13th, 2025, at Primorsk Oil Port, the largest energy export gateway for Moscow on the Baltic Sea, 2 giant tankers, Kusto and Kai-Yun, were entering the final stage of their fueling operation. Under the glare of industrial lights, hundreds of thousands of liters of crude oil surged through enormous steel pipelines, pumped straight into the cargo holds. Each ship had a capacity of more than 120,000 short tons, the equivalent of millions of barrels, and a single load like that was enough to sustain Russia's strategic export flow for days. To Moscow, they were not merely 2 ships, but floating vaults, keeping the very heartbeat of the national economy alive and ensuring energy contracts with Europe and China did not break. To Ukraine, they were the single most ideal targets across Russia's entire energy export chain. Strike here! It's nothing less than a gash into the veins of Russia's gasping war machine. And within just a few hours, a black gold treasure worth over $200 million USD will erupt into an unquenchable fireworks display. At 1:15 a.m., from a covert launch site in northern Ukraine, the first Lyuty AN-196 UAV screamed into the night like a ghost. Every 10 seconds after that, another took off. Within 7 minutes, the entire formation of over 40 UAVs had left their rails. They were like a pack of trained suicide hounds, programmed days in advance, each carrying a warhead of nearly 65 pounds of PBX-12, a thermoplastic polymer explosive variant with superior penetration, all directed at a single objective, Primorsk Oil Port. Rather than flying straight in, the swarm split into 3 main axes, forming a tactical pincer designed to deceive radar and fracture Russia's air defense response. Center axis, 20 UAVs, hugged the rail corridor via Belgorod-Voronezh, flying under 656 feet, completely avoiding ground radars. East axis, 10 UAVs, routed via Tambov-Ryazan, skirting areas hosting S-400 and Pantsir S-1 batteries around Tula, the no-fly high-priority zone for Moscow. West axis, 10 UAVs, followed the Belarus border, using terrain masking and deep forests to evade long-range Podsolnuk and Nebo-M radars. The entire UAV formation was controlled through the Skynode-S platform, a low-level artificial intelligence system integrating computer vision, high-resolution infrared cameras, and real-time digitized terrain maps. Even if GPS signals were jammed by the adversary, Luti's Skynode automatically switched to inertial/localized navigation, using imagery streamed from onboard cameras to match against the digital map. Power lines, transmission towers, forest contours, drainage channels, all were mapped by the AI as vital navigation landmarks. No radio signals were emitted, no remote control chatter was required, and that is why Luti becomes a nightmare. It is effectively immune to Russian electronic warfare. At 3:41 a.m., as the swarm closed on the Urzhev area, roughly 140 miles from the Leningrad border, Ukraine suddenly activated a trump card that had been hidden since the start of the operation. From a control center near Kharkiv, a Ukrainian low Earth orbit reconnaissance satellite was steered into action. This was not a routine spy satellite. It had been modified to carry a false reflection module specialized to jam radars. Its sole function, temporarily neutralize the relay radar chain along the Smolensk-Tver-Novgorod line. This was the critical early warning belt in northwest Russia, the line that allows the Russian military to detect threats from Belarus, Ukraine, or the Baltic. Over the next 7 minutes, Podsolnuk, Gamma DE, and even Nebo-M radars were forced to process dozens of false returns from an electronic cloud moving in parallel toward the northwest. While Russia scrambled over the sudden flood of red blips on their screens, 40 real Luti UAVs slipped quietly beneath the sky, straight toward their true objective, the strategic Primorsk oil port. At 4 a.m., after nearly 3 hours of terrain-hugging flight, the entire UAV formation had closed to the Gulf of Finland approaches, less than 95 miles from Primorsk, when 5 UAVs from the center axis unexpectedly peeled off the main formation and simultaneously swung their noses up, climbing rapidly to 16,400 feet, turning themselves into bait in the sky. Each was fitted with a cluster of radar-reflective panels and a signal emulation transmitter, accurately simulating the radar signature of a high-altitude strike package. In the eyes of Russian radar, these were no longer UAVs, but a real threat. At 4:08 a.m., on the radar screen at the Lezhnevo early warning station in Novgorod region, 5 unusual returns appeared. The returns were clear, stable, and exhibited strong reflectivity. Immediately, the alert level in the area was raised to level 1. Within less than 2 minutes, the sensor panel at the local Air Defense Command concluded unidentified targets, slow speed, low altitude, but with unusually high radar cross-section, likely reconnaissance UAVs or small aircraft. Committable to engagement. A firing order was issued at once. 2 Pantsir S-1 batteries in Yaroslavl launched simultaneously. 4 57E-6 missiles streaked into the sky. From Cherepovets, an S-400 battery fired 2 48N-6E missiles, Mach 6, covering the entire target intersection. Just 40 seconds later, all 5 returns vanished from the radar screens. Thermal data recorded multiple fragments falling into the forested area north of Novgorod. From the command post, the announcement confirmed 5 high-altitude intruding targets neutralized, no ongoing threat. But the Russian officers did not know that they had just shot down 5 sacrificial decoy UAVs, pre-programmed by Ukraine to be expended at this moment. The remaining 35 Luti UAVs skimmed close to the ground. Each was spaced 650 to 980 feet apart, maintained an altitude below 330 feet, emitted no signals, and returned no radar echoes, the entire operation relying on terrain mapping and inertial navigation. At 4:17 a.m., the central UAV formation crossed Lake Ilmen and pushed into the corridor between Novgorod and Leningrad. On Russian ground-based radar screens, everything remained utterly silent. No alerts were triggered. Beneath that veneer of calm, a nightmare was quietly closing in. At 4:22 a.m., the western wing approached the southern edge of the Narva Gulf, an area nominally covered by early warning radar posts and Pantsir batteries of the Leningrad military district. A faint blip began to appear on the Vyborg Air Defense Command's screen. The data was unclear. A fuzzy target, low speed, intermittent returns. An officer warned it could be a flock of migrating ducks or a low-flying stealth target. But no one had yet given the order to open fire. The engagement order was being delayed. Nobody wanted to press the button first for something that might be a radar illusion. At the same time, the 10 eastern UAVs crossed the Onega Lake area and approached the Petrozavodsk-Vyborg rail line, one of the logistic arteries leading straight to Primorsk. The lead UAVs used a real-time terrain synchronization algorithm, constantly matching sensor data to a 3D map to slip through GPS dead zones that Russian electronic warfare teams had erected along the route. Infrared cameras picked up glints from radar towers, and the AI instantly adjusted course, avoiding each watchpoint as if it had flown the line hundreds of times before. At 4:27 a.m., when the first UAVs were less than 25 miles from Primorsk, Russian ground radar began to register real contacts. Numerous small targets hugging the surface, moving at moderate speed, converging from 3 different directions. At the Air Defense Command near Vyborg, the duty lieutenant colonel finally ordered, "Situation Level 2. Activate Pantsir S1. Expand monitoring sector to the southeast and the coastline." But it was already too late. By the time the Pantsir radars swept the southeast sector, the 3 UAV formations, center, east, and west, were simultaneously closing in from all directions. This was no longer a single strike, it was a timed encirclement down to the second. Within 45 seconds, Baltic air defense controllers confirmed the worst. The entire UAV formation was heading straight for the Primorsk port, Russia's second-largest oil export hub. 6 Pantsir S1 batteries were immediately ordered to fire. From the coastal wood line, the launch tubes rose like angry serpents and then simultaneously spat 57 E-6 missiles, roaring through the night sky. In the skies, the remaining 35 UAVs split into 3 prongs. Each kept an altitude under 200 feet, weaving between container yards, coastal rail lines, and petrochemical complexes. All were coordinated under the principle of the swarm, each UAV an independent entity, yet also part of the whole, constantly sharing flight data, adjusting its bank angles to match the leader ahead, and evading threats through Skynode's synchronized algorithms. By this moment, Russia's last defensive layer began to respond. Operators on a Pantsir S1 battery shouted as the 1RS-2E radar finally locked multiple targets. In less than 90 seconds, 25 UAVs were destroyed, half shredded by 30mm autocannons as they closed under 656 feet, the rest intercepted by 57 E-6 missiles at close range. But the final 10 UAVs were unlike any that had come before. They were the Alpha Wolves, each assigned independent targets, unique flight algorithms, and carrying heavy payloads reserved for killing blows. Now they simultaneously activated their terminal attack mode. Primorsk oil port had only minutes left to survive. At 4:44 a.m., the last 10 Lyuty UAVs dropped below 165 feet, skimming the sea surface to hide within clutter reflections as their Skynode's navigation suite autonomously redistributed their final attack routes based on preloaded target data. They did not strike the same point. They divided the critical nodes of Primorsk's entire operating chain. The first 2 dove straight at the port's operations center, which controlled all loading schedules, fueling processes, and satellite routing. Instead of a perpendicular run, one pulled a sharp climb from the left, then plunged nose first into a second-floor window, identified as housing the main server cluster. The blast all but severed Primorsk's brain. As flames burst from the upper floor, two other UAVs simultaneously struck the tanker Kusto moored at the southern pier. The first slammed into the engine room, wiping out the power station and halting the oil pumps mid-flow. The second came from starboard, ramming the main intake pipe, triggering a secondary explosion. Unfinished crude spilled across the pier, igniting in less than 6 seconds. At 4:45 minutes and 12 seconds, two more UAVs locked onto the tanker Kai Yun, an Aframax-class vessel like Kusto, preparing to connect its intake line for the final transfer. The first tore into the intake valve control room, the second into the forward operations cabin. A fire column nearly 100 feet high roared from the deck, a death torch against the Baltic night. As flames spread along the quay, three more UAVs swung toward pump station number 2, the hub regulating more than 35% of Primorsk's total export throughput. The first destroyed the main pressure compression array, the second punched through the roof into the flow control regulator, and the third tore into the input signal receiver. Within just 0.8 seconds, pressure across the pipeline network surged beyond safe limits. Then, a thunderous blast ripped apart the pumping station's roof. Black smoke, scorching heat, and twisted steel fragments clawed into the sky. Primorsk had lost its pump station. In just 2 minutes, the last 10 UAVs had struck the port's vital organs. Two supertankers of over 120,000 short tons ablaze, the central pumping station obliterated, all power and coordination systems cut. Fires raged out of control. When firefighters arrived, temperatures at the pumping hub exceeded 1,830 degrees Fahrenheit. With no options left, authorities were forced to seal off the entire port. Satellite imagery showed Primorsk as a blazing scar more than 1 mile long, with 2 core infernos and 4 secondary fires. Russia later confirmed at least 2 tankers destroyed, the main loading line to offshore vessels halted, internal power grids damaged, and fuel exports through Primorsk disrupted for days. Under the shock of the strike, all tankers in the Primorsk Gulf were ordered to withdraw immediately, triggering cascading logistical delays. The international oil market wavered slightly on the news, evidence that Primorsk was not just technical infrastructure, but also a financial and political linchpin. On the morning of September 17th, Russia's Ministry of Defense officially admitted that Northwest air defenses had intercepted a long-range UAV attack near Primorsk, while insisting that most targets were neutralized. No details were given about the actual damage to the port, yet within hours, international OSINT channels, including GEO-confirmed, had geolocated the strike area through nighttime satellite imagery, thermal readings, and telegram videos. Western analysts concluded this attack marked a breakthrough in both range and precision for Ukraine's UAV force. This was no random tactic. It was a textbook execution of modern drone warfare. Swarm division, electronic jamming, deception, and simultaneous strikes from multiple vectors. The same playbook Ukraine had used to annihilate S-400 radars at Jankoy and Sevastopol. The raid cemented a strategic shift in modern war. With only a few dozen low-cost UAVs, each priced between $30,000 and $100,000, Ukraine pierced one of the densest air defense belts in northwest Russia. Meanwhile, Russia expended surface-to-air missiles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece, deploying wide forces, and still failed to stop the main blow. The failure at Primorsk showed that even the most heavily guarded civilian infrastructure is not immune to UAVs when an adversary fuses AI, swarm logic, and tactical precision. Above all, it sent a message to the world: if Primorsk can be hit, nowhere else is safe. Exactly 2:20 a.m., September 14th, 2025. In the Stroganovo area, Leningrad Oblast. An operative from the Shchit 91 combat group, disguised in a maintenance uniform, successfully infiltrated the junction between Stroganovo and Myshinskaya. He planted a directional explosive device onto the rail fasteners. The entire action was swift, precise, and left no trace. From a hidden command post 75 miles away, a Ukrainian reconnaissance team monitored the entire scene via thermal imagery streamed through a fiber-optic UAV link. The signal traveled through a glass core thinner than a human hair, delivering high-resolution visuals without generating any detectable electromagnetic emissions. On the screen, the thermal feed appeared razor-sharp, the diesel locomotive glowing at 115 degrees Fahrenheit, each tank car holding steady heat signatures. Thermal output does not lie. It revealed that all 15 tank cars were fully loaded, carrying an estimated over 2.2 million pounds of diesel fuel. The connecting joints exposed clear weak points, vulnerable to impact. The train was moving along the single-track corridor of Luga-Gachina, heading toward the Gachina rail hub, the only surviving ground lifeline linking the Leningrad rear area with the strategic defensive belt south of St. Petersburg. The sheer volume of fuel on board was enough to sustain 3 armored brigades for more than a week. But the value of the train went beyond just fuel. After 3 separate road sabotage incidents near Luga earlier that month, the Luga-Gachina railway had become the last artery still intact. That was why Ukrainian intelligence elevated this convoy into a priority target. Cripple it, and the southern defensive ring of St. Petersburg would be starved instantly. The data was cross-checked. The air defense blind zone confirmed, the strike plan locked. This was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate plan, prepared in detail, waiting only for the prey to step into the trap to trigger a 2-phase attack. For the crew, this was a strategic transport, tightly guarded and cloaked in secrecy, but they had no idea the entire schedule had already fallen into Ukrainian hands. Every movement of the train had been reconstructed, pieced together from local informant networks using encrypted phones combined with GSM leakage from a logistics relay station. SIGINT technicians processed the packets, cross-referenced them with commercial satellite imagery, and built a complete timetable. Departure times, average cruising speed, crew changeover points, even the brief halts at secondary checkpoints, all digitized and overlaid onto a tactical map. Thus, the Shchit-91 combat group was able to reach the junction between Stroganovo and Mashinskaya and rig the directional explosive to the track fasteners. This device was never intended to obliterate the whole convoy. Its sole purpose, create a blast strong enough to derail the lead cars. Once the train came to a halt inside the air defense dead zone, the real strike would begin. At exactly 2:35, with the train less than 7.5 miles from the ambush point, a disguised truck hidden deep in the forest sent out an encrypted signal. Moments later, 4 FPV drones launched in a wide arc, each carrying a small PG-7VL anti-armor warhead mounted on a reinforced frame. These were not off-the-shelf commercial drones. They had upgraded cameras with 56 times digital zoom, hardened data links in jamming environments, and sustained cruise speeds of 100 to 112 miles per hour. UAV-1, locked on car number 3. UAV-2, targeted car number 9. UAV-3, moved toward car number 13. UAV-4, held altitude, ready to strike the locomotive if required. Inside the cab, the train chief was checking engine oil pressure and coolant temperature. Beside him, the co-driver scanned the brake air pressure and steady speed readings. All parameters remained within safe limits, but they had no idea. Unseen eyes were watching every movement as the train crept toward a trap already laid out. At 2:50 a.m., the train rolled into the open corridor between sparse woodland and meadows. This was the marked gap in air defense, where the charges had been planted. Speed, 27 miles per hour. Recon drone feed confirmed. No radar returns, no active jamming, no battlefield coordination signals from any supporting units within 15 miles. In the command center, the screen flashed status. Status, tactically isolated. At the same moment, the message, fire conditions confirmed, was relayed from the UAV station to the ground assault team. Immediately, all control stations switched to attack mode. Cabin lights turned from green to red. The UAV screens locked targets, plotted approach vectors in real time, and streamed guidance to the FPV drones now closing in. Countdown displayed 60 seconds, 50 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. At exactly 2:51 minutes and 44 seconds AM, car number 3 rolled over the prepared section of rail. A pressure sensor under tie number 9 registered an overload. 0.4 seconds later, the closed circuit engaged. A string of small charges detonated sequentially along the fasteners and sleepers. The blast was not massive, but sufficient to shear the joints, bend the rails, and pry the wooden ties loose from the ballast. Nearly 985 feet of track instantly lost stability. Cars 4, 5, 6, through 11 slid off alignment. Some wheels skidded into the ballast bed. The entire train lurched, shuddered, and twisted under momentum. The speedometer needle plunged. Tremors rippled along all 15 cars. Inside the cab, the train chief barely had time to yank the emergency brake. The co-driver hit the alarm. Compressed air hissed as brakes vented across the train length. Nearly 2 million pounds of steel shrieked across the tracks. At 2:51 minutes and 50 seconds AM, the convoy derailed completely. Car number 4 tilted left. Car number 6 jumped axle, dragging the following cars into diagonal collapse. Couplers twisted, steel shells slammed together, fuel hatches burst open. Part of the locomotive listed sideways. Mid-cars skewed nearly 40 degrees off the main axis. Some rear cars vaulted off the ballast, stacking atop one another like hollow shells. Nothing remained in its original shape. The train lay overturned, exposed among shattered track and scattered rock. A few small fires smoldered. Fuel trickled into thin streaks under the tanks. The beast had been ripped from its path. The crew scrambled out, desperate to salvage the convoy, unaware that the real killing blow was still inbound. Now the train lay like a wounded animal in the field, awaiting either a miracle or to become carrion for vultures. And Ukraine had calculated perfectly. No guard posts within 12 miles. The nearest settlement was over 5.5 miles away. No air defense, no rapid reaction units. All that awaited was the finishing strike, the one that would cripple the train beyond recovery, severing the supply artery feeding the Volosovo front. The entire operation had been scripted in advance under the hard stop, fast kill tactic. Force the target to halt at a pre-selected site, then destroy it with pinpoint UAV strikes. At exactly 2:52 minutes and 40 seconds AM, from 3 directions, 4 FPV drones were closing in, less than 2 miles from the target. On the reconnaissance screen, everything was crystal clear. Stable speed, formation intact, altitude consistent. UAV-1 locked on car number 3, UAV-2 targeted car number 9, UAV-3 moved toward car number 13. UAV-4 maintained altitude, waiting for the order to strike the locomotive. At 2:52 minutes and 34 seconds AM, UAV-1 crossed the abandoned highway cutting through the forest, dropping to an altitude of 100 feet. The camera shook slightly in the low-level wind. The operator made 3 manual corrections to stabilize the view. Attack range, 1,050 feet. Dive angle, 24 degrees. The target zoomed in within 0.8 seconds. The reticle held steady. 2 seconds later, detonation. The warhead pierced through car number 3. Diesel vaporized under pressure. A jet of fire shot 82 feet high. The blast wave knocked car number 2 off alignment. Flames raced through the coupling pipe and caught car number 4. The locomotive cluster ignited. Fire spread with the wind. Dense black smoke rolled upward. At 2:52 minutes and 50 seconds AM, UAV-2 approached from the southeast. Target, car number 9, the convoy's center. Aim point, left side weld, just beneath the relief valve. The shaped charge punched through the tank wall, leaving a hole about 3 inches wide. Flames erupted. followed by a full secondary explosion. Cars 8 and 10 ignited in sequence. The 3 center cars burned as one. Thermal readings showed temperatures exceeding 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 seconds after the second blast, UAV-3 locked in. Dive angle, 28 degrees. Speed, 107 miles per hour. Wind stable. Camera axis, steady. Car number 13 was ripped open. Fuel sprayed outward, igniting in mid-air. Flames spread to cars 14 and 15. The tail section was now on fire. The train had split into 3 independent fire clusters. Front section burning for over 10 minutes. Center, flames spreading at extreme speed. Rear, newly ignited, thick smoke billowing. No one could approach. Even fire response units, if any existed, would be unable to reach the site for the next 30 minutes. At 2:53 minutes and 20 seconds a.m., UAV-4 still hovered above, unarmed. The blaze at the front intensified, smoke now obscuring the sight picture. From the control station came a single command: "Finish it!" 4 seconds later, UAV-4 dropped to 130 feet, the camera locking onto the diesel locomotive. It dove at a 25-degree angle, accelerating to 110 miles per hour. The warhead punched through the 0.8-inch steel engine housing and detonated after 0.3 seconds. The explosion was small but surgical. The engine block shattered. The drive shaft split apart. The transmission was pulverized. The technical bay ignited from within. The cab twisted, the entire locomotive leaning 10 degrees to the right, dead forever. At 2:55 a.m., the convoy was now a corpse. 3 blazing clusters still roared. Black smoke churned upward beyond 650 feet, driven straight toward Gatchina. 10 seconds later, the reconnaissance UAV feed went dark. The fiber line self-destructed. Within 4 minutes, the control team had packed every device, wiped mission data from the buffer. Nothing traceable remained. On site, the heat kept rising. Fuel still burned. Partially intact tankers began cooking off one by one. In under 11 minutes, a Russian fuel train carrying over 2.2 million pounds of diesel had been annihilated. By 4 FPV drones, 1 directional explosive, and less than $10,000 in operational cost. But the fire kept raging. The locomotive cluster poured out heavy smoke. The center blaze started to wane, while a secondary detonation in the rear blew the hatch of car number 15 clear across the western field. Fuel slicks kept burning on the ground, forming a 500-foot line of fire trailing with the wind. The remaining cars grew hotter each minute, threatening new chain explosions. No one dared to approach for the next half hour. Total damage: 9 cars completely destroyed, 3 heavily damaged. The diesel locomotive shattered off its axis, unsalvageable. The rail segment between Stroganovo and Mishinskaya was warped across 984 feet, with at least 90 sleepers torn out. Regional rail traffic was crippled. Cleanup and minimum restoration would take no less than 72 hours. Less than 30 minutes after the strike, the first videos surfaced on Telegram. From the edge of Mishinskaya, footage showed 3 blazing infernos, smoke columns rising like pressure plumes over 650 feet high. By 6 a.m. the next morning, Russia's Ministry of Transport released its official statement, brief, formulaic: a freight train experienced a technical malfunction and derailed due to track failure in Leningrad Oblast. No casualties. All cars were reported empty. Emergency crews are on site. No mention of drones. No mention of shaped charges. No mention of fire. But satellite images told a different story. 9 tankers burned out, frames twisted, hatches hurled dozens of meters away. Flames soared tens of feet high. The locomotive lay on its side, engine room obliterated. A smoke plume stretched nearly 2.5 miles toward Gatchina, visible even on commercial thermal satellite imagery released hours later. Opposition sources and Ukrainian intelligence confirmed the train was not empty. It carried diesel fuel, part of an operational-level logistics chain feeding the armored grouping south of St. Petersburg, a sector being reinforced for an expected counteroffensive later that month. Estimated losses: 9 cars, roughly 2.2 million pounds of fuel valued between $600,000 and $650,000. Locomotive worth about $2.5 million. Rail infrastructure damage requiring at least $350,000 for initial repair. Total material loss exceeded $3.5 million. Meanwhile, Ukraine's total expenditure under $10,000, 4 FPV drones, 1 fiber optic reconnaissance UAV, and a pre-planted directional charge. The southern Leningrad supply line was severed for 3 days. At least 2 armored brigades had to reroute through the secondary line via Luga, longer, narrower, more exposed to ambush. Subsequent convoys were forced to split, add escorts, and divert air defense assets, stretching Russia's defensive grid thin across the entire corridor. It wasn't just fuel that was lost, it was rhythm. The heartbeat of Russian logistics faltered. Across Western military forums, comments appeared within hours. 4 FPV drones and 1 mine. They burned an entire supply route. This is textbook asymmetric warfare and a warning to every other train. Russia lost over $3 million. Ukraine spent 1 night and 4 cheap drones. By nearly 8 a.m., the fires were still not fully extinguished. The locomotives smoldered. Core temperatures remained above 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Half-burned tankers lay twisted like carcasses across the open field. Black smoke still rose, and it wasn't just diesel burning. It was logistics. It was a system cracking from within. No rail line was safe anymore, no train could sleep through the night, and no supply route would ever again be taken for granted. At exactly 2:25 a.m. on November 14th, 2025 local time, a formation of 50 low-cost decoy UAVs operated by the Ukrainian Tactical Air Force began crossing the Black Sea, heading directly toward the heavily fortified eastern defense belt of Novorossiysk, the zone protected by the densest air defense network in the entire Krasnodar region. After more than 372 miles of night-long flight, they were now less than 25 miles from their target, Novorossiysk port. Their engines were burning hot after more than 2 hours of continuous operation. Fuel gauges on the control consoles at the UAV command center were dipping dangerously low. A few drones began to shake slightly due to the low-altitude flight and the heavy humidity rolling off the sea. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, until a Russian Navy Raptor-class patrol boat suddenly emerged from the darkness, not far from the tip of Cape Sujuk. Almost simultaneously, the crew aboard the vessel detected the threat and immediately unleashed a burst of 14.5mm machine gun fire. They managed to shoot down only 3 to 4 drones flying within close range. Moments later, the fire control team launched 2 Igla-S MANPADS missiles, weapons designed to kill helicopters, now fired at tiny low RCS blips skimming just above the Black Sea surface. The formation instantly broke apart like a flock of birds ambushed by a hawk. One group shot upward, startled by the sudden attack. Another group dove sharply, hugging the water and riding wave reflections. The remaining drones held their course, absorbing incoming fire. The result: one Igla lost lock and detonated far from its target. The second struck the tail of a UAV, setting it ablaze in mid-air, but it did nothing to stop the decoy swarm from pressing toward the air defense ring guarding Novorossiysk port. Realizing they could not stop the UAVs, the Raptor's crew hastily transmitted an emergency code sequence to the Air Defense Command Post located just 3 miles away. Only seconds after receiving the distress signal, the entire early warning grid spanning Krasnodar, Gelendzhik, Novorossiysk snapped to red alert. A network of 91 N6E Big Bird, 96 L6E, and electro-optical surveillance stations began streaming continuous warnings. Multiple inbound objects. Altitude low. Speed 140 to 170. Possible UAV swarm. Inside the Integrated Air Defense System, IADS, command center of southern Russia, the on-duty lieutenant general allowed no hesitation. He issued a single order: Engage all targets. Destroy everything. And that was exactly the reaction Ukrainian planners had been waiting for. Seconds later, the entire defensive grid protecting Novorossiysk awoke like a beast struck with a spear. S-400s, Buk M2s, Tor M2s, and Pantsir S-1s all fired simultaneously. Their active radar seekers came alive, locking onto the tiny white blips rushing toward them. Within minutes, the eastern Black Sea lit up like a military fireworks show. Rocket plumes from SAM launches, tracer streams from autocannons, and fireballs where several drones were shredded mid-air. While Russian air defense crews cheered their successful intercepts, believing they had neutralized a major threat, hundreds of miles away, inside a small underground command bunker in Mykolaiv Oblast, the Lyuty strike team was busy processing a surge of freshly updated data. The Russians had no idea that the targets they had just spent tens of millions of dollars in missiles and ammunition to destroy were nothing more than cheap composite frames, 3D printed or repurposed from salvaged commercial drones costing under $10,000 each. And their purpose here was not destruction, but to gather priceless intelligence packets. A detailed coordinate map had just been uploaded directly into the 12 Lyuty strike UAVs, now flying behind the decoys at a distance of 9 miles. They had launched only 20 minutes after the decoy swarm. Immediately upon receiving the updated target grid, all 12 Lyuty UAVs shifted formation simultaneously. 4 aircraft moved to the western corridor. 5 aircraft skimmed along the northern shoreline of Semes Bay, while 3 others plunged straight into the narrow gap between 2 radar coverage zones, a slit only 130 to 200 feet wide, just enough for the drones to slip through undetected. Each An-196 Lyuty measured less than 10 feet long, built entirely from radar-absorbent composite materials that reduced its radar cross-section to below 0.05 square meters, smaller than a Black Sea seagull. They carried HEI penetrator incendiary warheads with nearly 176 pounds of explosives closing in on their targets. At 3:10 a.m., all 12 Lyuty UAVs entered the final attack run, each diving onto its assigned target as Russian duty officers were still busy drafting their successful engagement report. The first 2 Lyuty drones slammed directly into the 96 L6E radar station at the Abrau-Dyurso Air Defense Cluster, a $25 million early warning radar, the high-altitude eyes of the S-400 system. The first drone struck the rotating antenna mast, shattering the entire horizontal scan mechanism. The second smashed into the rear power cabin, triggering a localized explosion across the electrical and control systems. Less than 10 seconds later, the command station radar screen went completely dark. Immediately after the 96 L6E went down, 3 more Lyuty drones closed in on the 92 N6 Gravestone fire control radar, the central targeting brain of the entire S-400 battery at Gelendzhik. This radar is an exceptionally sophisticated fire control system, responsible for tracking and locking targets for the 48 N6DM long-range missiles, valued at $35 to $40 million, mounted on a full 360-degree rotating platform to command airspace out to more than 186 miles. Lyuty drone number 4 slammed into the main control cabin, the hub operating the signal processing computers and the data link network leading to the S-400 command vehicle. Drone number 5 struck the phased array antenna joint, snapping the central rotation axis, instantly disabling directional scanning. Drone number 6 detonated beside the electro-optical signal transmission hub, destroying the entire data pipeline between the radar and its launchers. In less than 40 seconds, both core radars of the S-400 network, the 96L6E mid-high altitude early warning, and the 92 N6 fire control were completely knocked out. The entire Novorossiysk region, once believed to be shielded by an impenetrable radar network, was now blind. Immediately, the remaining 7 Liu-T drones were ordered to switch targets and strike the surrounding S-400 launchers. At the northern Abrao d'Urso site, 2 launchers were hit in their control cabins, igniting wiring bundles and disabling their firing capability. A third launcher had its empty missile canister pierced, its frame severely damaged, with flames spreading rapidly across the support structure. At Gelendzhik, a final launcher was attacked head-on from the seaward direction. The impact snapped the elevation frame, rendering the entire launcher unable to raise or deploy its missiles. According to Ukrainian consolidated reports, at least 4 S-400 launchers were heavily damaged, and 2 core radars were destroyed or rendered inoperable, completely paralyzing the long-range air defense shield guarding Novorossiysk port. Buk and Tor units still remained, but without long-range early warning, the so-called impenetrable sky dome existed only on paper. The coastline corridor was now wide open. From a concealed launch site in Mykolaiv Oblast, the true killers of that night entered the stage. 3 long-range upgraded Neptune cruise missiles. Ukrainian engineers had spent 2 years transforming Neptune from a coastal anti-ship weapon into a long-range infrastructure strike missile. Range expanded enough to reach Novorossiysk from deep inside Ukrainian territory. A refined sea-skimming algorithm enabling flight just a few feet above the water. Upgraded INS hardened against severe GNSS jamming. When the SIGINT message came in, S-400 cluster in Novorossiysk temporarily blind. The Neptune launch crew received the final command, fire. Immediately, all 3 long-range Neptune missiles launched 10 seconds apart. Each carried a 150-kilogram penetrator warhead designed to explode violently after punching through industrial structures like oil tanks, pump towers, or manifold rigs. They advanced over the Black Sea in a staggered triangular formation, each missile selecting its own route to minimize detection by the remaining Russian naval radars offshore. Flying at ultra-low altitude, just 16 to 23 feet above the water, the missiles vanished entirely from long-range ground and shipborne radar sweep. When they closed to less than 19 miles from shore, all 3 Neptune missiles entered their terminal phase. Their active radar seekers powered on, scanning for the strongest return signatures. And there they were, the tank clusters, manifold pipelines, and loading berths of the Sheskari's oil terminal, standing out like a training target. Seconds later, the radar terrain matching algorithm activated. Real-time seeker imagery was matched instantaneously with preloaded maps of each technical cluster, maps gathered earlier by Ukrainian UAVs and satellites. The targets were confirmed. Tonight, Ukraine would strike directly at the throat of Russia's oil export system, severing the flow of oil leaving Russia for the world at the final choke point before loading onto tankers. At 3:40 a.m., with all 3 Neptunes less than 7.5 miles from Novorossiysk port, the Russian air defenses, crippled for nearly an hour, finally realized what was coming. There was no time for verification. No time for orders. A surviving Pantsir S-1 near the port switched to emergency intercept mode. A volley of 57 E-6E missiles streaked into the sky in desperation. Simultaneously, 2 Tor M2 systems buried deeper inside Novorossiysk residential zones swiveled their turrets and each fired 2 short-range interceptors. 6 intercept missiles in total launched within 15 seconds. But it was too late. Neptune was flying at just 16 feet, far too low for radar stabilization. The interceptors veered off course, detonating over the water. Pantsir and Tor had just expended their last missiles, unable to stop what was coming. All 3 Neptunes were still inbound, now less than 3 miles from target. At 3:45 a.m., Neptune 1 slammed directly into the central manifold platform, the convergence point for every oil pipeline feeding the loading piers. The explosion triggered an immediate chain reaction. Pipes ruptured. High-pressure crude blasted out like a fire hose. Several automatic valves ruptured backward. Within 3 seconds, the entire manifold zone was engulfed in a rising oil firestorm, twisting upward with the sea wind, throwing a crimson glow across the surface of Semes Bay. Immediately after that, Neptune II arrived. It aimed straight for the eastern loading pier, where the oil tanker Arlen, flying the flag of Sierra Leone, was moored in the middle of its loading cycle. The missile struck directly at the base of the main pump tower. Its warhead detonated just above the waterline, triggering a dual-effect explosion. One blast tore into the pier-side loading structure, while the shockwaves surged into the ship's internal compartments holding thousands of tons of crude oil. A moment later, Arlen ignited from the inside out. Its hatch covers burst open like mine charges, the hull listed sharply to port, and flames swept across the deck. A spreading slick of oil on the water caught fire, becoming a hundreds-meter-long river of flame running alongside the pier. For Ukraine, this was collateral damage. For Russia, however, the strike on a foreign vessel carried consequences in diplomacy, maritime insurance, and the international energy market. Before the port's control systems could even react, Neptune III closed in and smashed into the technical control hub, the site responsible for coordinating electrical power, pressure management, and fire suppression across all of Cheskharis. The explosion did not produce a towering fireball, but it obliterated everything critical. The high-pressure pump network, the main electrical cabinets, the internal fire suppression pipelines, the automated central control grid. The terminal's entire emergency response architecture was now completely severed. With flames roaring into the sky, there were no remaining systems capable of containing them. In less than 90 seconds, with only 3 cruise missiles, Ukraine had pushed the entire Cheskharis export terminal into total paralysis. The massive crude oil storage tanks were punctured, triggering cascading explosions. The manifold sector and technical stations were destroyed, impossible to restart for hours. The pressure control center and pump command station were burned out. The financial lifeline of Novorossiysk port, an estimated 140 to 180 million US dollars per day, was cut off instantly. And the strategic consequences did not stop there. The CPC, Caspian Pipeline Consortium pipeline, the artery transporting oil from Kazakhstan and the Caspian region to the Black Sea, was forced to shut its valves along the entire route. Within minutes of the strikes, all tankers in Semes Bay were ordered to vacate the piers and shift into emergency anchoring positions. Oil exports through the Black Sea dropped to zero, at least for the first 12 to 24 hours, potentially longer if the fire suppression and pressure control systems could not be restarted. This attack did not only destroy infrastructure, it immediately shook the entire global energy market. Insurance premiums for tankers passing through the Black Sea surged 15 to 25% in the first 6 hours due to the elevated risk of UAV and cruise missile attack. Global Brent crude prices rose 2% in the morning session of November 14th, not because supply had suddenly collapsed, but because market confidence in Russia's ability to protect its rear area infrastructure had fractured. This was not just an attack on an oil port, it was a strike against the pillar of Russia's energy export system and the global logistics chain that Moscow once considered untouchable. A direct blow to the financial engine of Moscow's war budget, the very engine sustaining Russia's military machine across every front. With a single coordinated strike, Ukraine shook the foundations of the Russian economy, forcing the Kremlin to confront an undeniable truth. Nowhere is safe anymore. At 7:50 a.m. on the morning of the 16th of October, 2025, a column of 22 Russian armored vehicles, the largest subgroup counting 11 vehicles including tanks and armored fighting vehicles, had just moved out of the Malinivka area. They were quietly advancing toward Shakov, the position where a Russian artillery cluster had been deployed to support a push toward Dobropilya. But none of them knew that every movement they made was being locked down by an electronic fire control network from across the border. From a ridge 9 kilometers to the southwest, a Furia reconnaissance UAV had trailed the column for 15 minutes, recording speeds, formation order, and the moment each vehicle crossed fixed markers. Its integrated FLIR sensors analyzed engine temperatures to determine which vehicles were heavily loaded and which served as command platforms. All data were encrypted and streamed straight to the Forward Artillery Control Center, where a 3-layer ambush plan was already set in place. On the commander's screen, the targets were clear. The lead group, 6 vehicles, 2 T-72B3s, 3 BMP-2s, 1 BRDM-2 reconnaissance vehicle. The center group, 8 vehicles, 2 BRM-1K command vehicles, 2 Ural 4320 ammunition trucks, 3 MTLB's towing field repair trailers, 1 auxiliary fuel truck. The rear group, 8 vehicles, 3 BMP-3s, 2 T-90A tanks, 3 Kamaz fuel trucks. The total estimated logistics load reached more than 15 tons of artillery rounds, explosives, fuel, and technical equipment. Among that load were approximately 12 tons of 122mm artillery rounds, roughly 320 to 360 shells, enough for the artillery cluster to sustain fire for 72 hours straight. 21,000 liters of diesel divided across the 3 Kamaz trucks, sufficient to keep tanks, artillery, and mechanized units fueled for 2 to 3 days of continuous operations. A field repair node carried welding gear, recovery equipment, spare track sets, a generator, and technical first response systems for the front. Command and control, communications suites were mounted on the 2 BRM-1K vehicles, with the capability to coordinate artillery, UAVs, and infantry teams in the area. With just 22 vehicles, they could sustain the entire Dobropilia assault for 3 days, delivering deadly operational tempo, unless stopped. They moved in an organized manner at a cruising speed of 40 kilometers per hour, in a half-combat, half-logistics formation, having just left the cover of a fixed air defense complex. From this moment, the column would be alone for 20 to 25 minutes, exposed across an open depression framed by sparse reeds and pine forest, with no observation posts, before reaching the rally point on Shakov's edge. During this stretch, the column hugged tree cover, hoping to remain concealed, but they did not know that, with a precision intelligence network, Ukraine already had the time of appearance, the route, and had designed a perfect trap to funnel them in. Recon teams had surveyed the route early. The road the column had to take, one side radar-masked by forest, the other side open fallow fields without a turning point, was ideal to stage a 3-tier strike with near-zero escape probability. Ukraine's kamikaze FPV detachments were emplaced at dawn. Each team consisted of 2 drones, concealed within abandoned residential structures north of Shakov, low terrain with dense shrubbery and crossfield rice beds, excellent for camouflage. Each drone carried a penetrator warhead weighing 2.5 to 3.0 kilograms, programmed to self-destruct after 4 minutes if it failed to hit. The guidance systems were tuned using orthophotos from the reconnaissance UAV, enabling the drones to fly low over the paddies, avoid RF exposure, and evade temporary emitter nodes the Russians had planted along the route. Meanwhile, an engineering team of Azov prepared remote detonated mines. The PTK-M1R and TM62 charges were not primed to annihilate immediately, but to force a miscue from Russian commanders. When a front wheel struck a mine, the instinctive reaction is dispersion, or a veer into open ground, or a halt to assess. That is when formation gaps begin to appear. When a command vehicle or an ammunition truck is pushed out of the column's center, it becomes isolated, easily locked, and then the most vulnerable to destruction. The key that makes it all mesh is timing. 1 minute late, and the column might have reached civilian hamlets. 1 minute early, and the artillery would have missed the primary aim. But if struck at the exact instant, damaging just 2 to 3 core vehicles, the entire spearhead must stop. 3 kilometers away, a Mavic 3 drone was operating at an altitude of 120 meters, tilting to hold a tight tracking angle. GPS parameters, transmitted images, and target recognition algorithms allowed surveillance teams to lock onto distinct heat trails and the spacing between vehicles. In infrared imagery, the command vehicle glowed like a beating heart, hot and steady, due to continuous comms operation. The fuel truck at the rear lay tarped, but heat leaking from pressurized pumps showed as a long, bright streak against the cool ground. At the command center more than 10 kilometers from the scene, the indicators on the screens changed continuously. Wind, southwest. Beaufort 2. Visibility, 3,800 meters. Russian side, UAV not detected, fire control radar not active, EW not yet engaged. That was when the trap closed. Everything waiting for the column to advance exactly 1,400 meters further, waiting for the command vehicle to enter the clearing between 2 tree belts, where the artillery could obtain the cleanest lock, waiting for the lead track to grind down onto a pre-marked rut. At 8, Furia reported, column turning into the Shakov intersection. A BMP-2 in lead accelerated. 2 tanks followed spaced 35 meters apart. The BRM-1K command vehicle rolled into the designated clearing. The coordinates had been marked 3 days earlier. In the command center, the Azov brigade commander hammered 2 encrypted lines. Go Alpha, confirm, BAT-M 270, target GR-6229, fire 1. The ambush was triggered. Immediately, M270 rocket artillery fired from positions behind Novapil. A salvo of M30A1 GMLRS cluster warheads was programmed to airburst, spreading lethal fragments down the corridor. 23 seconds later, warheads detonated simultaneously at 20 to 30 meters above the lead elements. A BMP-2 took hits. Its turret ring was wrecked. Smoke belched from the ammunition compartment. The crew abandoned through hatches. A BMP-3 suffered a left track hit, lost balance, and toppled across the furrow. One T-72B3 took a glancing fragment and veered into the field edge, losing mobility. The other T-72B3 was buffeted by near-explosion debris, not critically damaged, but peeled away from formation and forced to stop for checks. In less than 40 seconds after the first salvo, the marching order had collapsed. Vehicles rearward braked hard and streamed out to both sides of the fields. Internal communications were severed. Each vehicle element improvised, attempting to turn or find exit routes. While the formation was in chaos, a directional PTKM-1R mine detonated under the belly of an Ural 4320 ammunition truck. The rear axle was obliterated. Loose 122mm rounds were scattered. Secondary detonations ignited, producing a fire column nearly 10 meters high and a backward shockwave. The BRM-1K immediately behind took a heavy fragment hit to its radio mast. The command suite was wrecked. The vehicle careened into the field and jammed on its front gear. The second Ural was blinded by dirt and debris. The crew lost directional control. An MTLB towing a repair trailer tried to edge clear, but its tracks bogged in the mud. Remaining vehicles began to split into the fields seeking escape, not realizing those lateral routes were exactly where Ukraine had prepared more TM-62 and PTKM-1R mines. Seconds after the column dispersed, a BMP-3 rolled onto a side mine and overturned. Its turret separated from the hull. Immediately after, a following T-90A steering into the same lane detonated another mine. Its nose collapsed, black smoke spurting from beneath. 3 more vehicles were removed from the fight. The column found itself trapped. Ahead, swamp. Behind, fire and wreckage. Every escape lane was blocked by the very detours the commanders had trusted. But the strike was not over. As the wounded formation writhed, the vultures arrived. At 8:10, 3 FPV suicide drones from the Azov Brigade, staged 2 kilometers from the ambush site, launched in a fan pattern. The first slammed into the BRM-1K from the southeast at 130 kilometers per hour, punching through the radio control box. The explosion was precise. The cabin disappeared. The central command node was erased. The second impact targeted the rear KAMAZ fuel truck. The drone penetrated the tank compartment and detonated. A massive fireball erupted, black smoke blanketing the paddy. The third swung in from the west, locking on a BMP-2 that was rotating its turret. The drone struck the drive cluster, destroying the main gun control. A short, sharp detonation. From order to the final FPV hit, 6 minutes and 41 seconds. No return fire was recorded, no suppression, no relief. 10 minutes after the last strike, ground reconnaissance teams moved in from the north, using low-level drones and helmet cams to document the scene. Imagery confirmed, 9 armored vehicles destroyed completely, 4 AFVs immobilized, 4 vehicles abandoned, 4 vehicles unaccounted for. By 8:50, the entire Russian column in the Malinivka to Shakov corridor had been neutralized. The Dobropilya strike severed the primary supply line for the Russian task group at Shakov to Mikilske. Tanks and artillery waiting on resupply of shells, fuel, and repair parts from the struck column were now left dry. The Russian mechanized brigade tasked with the western push was forced to postpone its planned breakthrough, not for lack of manpower, but for lack of ammunition and fuel. In adjacent sectors, Ukraine recorded a 36% drop in Russian artillery rounds fired within 48 hours after the ambush. Some armored units canceled assault plans, shifted to passive defense, or requested resupply from the eastern flank. Logistic pressure shifted rearward, clogging an already strained Russian supply network. Organizationally, Dobropilya forced immediate Russian adjustments. The Malinivka route was designated a high-risk zone, forcing subsequent convoys to detour via Novodonetsky or secondary corridors, increasing transit time from 2 hours to 6 hours. Convoys were prohibited from traveling in large groups. They were split into small packets of 4 to 5 trucks, reducing per-move tonnage but creating transport congestion and sharply lowering throughput. Concurrently, escorts increased. More short-range air defense like ZSU-23s or Tor-M2s, plus extra EW units. Escorts meant fewer combat units on the front line. Worst of all, every resupply corridor now required route clearance teams to open the way, making each mission longer, more manpower-intensive, and twice as risky. These changes did not make Russia lose instantly, but they forced Moscow to expend time, fuel, and technical assets just to maintain the same operational tempo. In modern war, when tempo is cut and operating costs double without achieving breakthrough, you have begun to lose, even if not yet defeated. On the information front, Ukraine did not miss the opportunity. The Azov Brigade released a 2-minute UAV video the same day. The footage spoke for itself. A T-72 abandoned mid-road, turret cocked at 45 degrees like a broken neck, a BMP charred black with its track thrown 15 meters from the hull, the BRM-1K, the command center of the column, reduced to a smoking steel frame. Images spread fast across Telegram, military TikTok, Western press, and Russian opposition outlets. International media labeled it a textbook example of a multi-layered kill chain, from reconnaissance to EW, precision artillery, directional mines, kamikaze drones, and post-strike reconnaissance. Not a lucky hit, but an organized chain of destruction, layer by layer, minute by minute, roll by roll. The psychological impact was stark. When a well-organized column, with lead tanks, armed escorts, and repair vehicles, can be annihilated in 7 minutes by drones and precision rockets, the message is clear: nowhere is safe. Troops abandoning vehicles and retreating on foot across fields is not a sign of tactical defeat so much as an attack on the organization of their campaign, the logistics backbone. For Ukraine, Dobropilya was more than a tactical success. It proved that even without air superiority or heavy firepower, they could slow a major offensive axis through data, organization, and real-time response. For Russia, it was a warning. Resupply convoys, even armored and escorted, are not immune to a pre-planned ambush built on behavioral analysis, geolocated coordinates, and tactical blind spots. In 2025, the Donetsk battlefield is no longer a place for mechanized columns to move in silence. A few minutes lapse in vigilance can turn an entire formation into wrecks scattered in a field with no one able to recover them. (00:15 a.m., October 26, 2025. Through the infrared feed of two Leleka 100 reconnaissance UAVs, the Russian hidden base appears in sharp relief. Heat streaks across the bivouac, clearly marking where a large concentration of material has been staged. 8 Ural 4320 military trucks, each carrying about 8,820 to 11,025 pounds of artillery ammunition. Nearby, 4 KAMAZ 5350 tanker trucks holding a total of 2,512 U.S. gallons of diesel fuel. They are massed beside a reinforced dome warehouse that has been marked as the battalion-level field logistics hub for the entire eastern Donetsk cluster. The total weight of materiel, fuel, and ammunition is estimated to exceed 583,160 pounds, enough to sustain the entire mechanized battalion for 48 hours without resupply. But the most striking detail, directly behind the base sits a colossal dam holding up to approximately 80 billion U.S. gallons, approximately 300 million cubic meters, of water. Within 15 minutes, a bold plan is sketched. Ukraine will turn the enemy's own reservoir into a weapon, creating an artificial flood from the dam's water. Objective: breach the Belgorod Dam's subsidiary control cluster so that a titanic surge of water will entirely submerge the Russian logistics node, wrecking any river crossing plans. At 3:05 a.m., in a dense wood near Chuhuiv, 3 HIMARS launchers are pulled out from camouflage pits. The target has been locked using coordinate data streamed back from reconnaissance UAVs, 2 minutes after a final systems check. The order to fire is transmitted from the headquarters of Ukraine's 16th Field Corps. The Ready Fire status lights on panel number 2 come on, all 3 crews confirm. The 3 HIMARS roar to life simultaneously. Each launcher carries 2 GMLR-SER rounds, the newest GPS-guided rockets supplied by the United States, with ranges beyond 93 miles and exceptional accuracy. Each warhead weighs 200 pounds, a penetrator design with a heavy steel casing and a shaped charge core, specifically built to punch through reinforced concrete and detonate inside a dam structure. A total of 6 GMLR-SER rockets are fired. They immediately activate dual GPS plus INS navigation, locking on the upstream dam coordinates at Belgorod, the strategic crossing point where the Siversky Donets meets the Russian logistics axis into northern Kharkiv. At the same time, northwest of Volchansk, from a prepared heat-resistant makeshift runway, 2 UJ-22 decoy UAVs sprint into the sky. These are low-cost stealth decoys improvised by Ukraine. Composite foam airframes that absorb radar, fitted with RF emission modules to emulate cruise missile signatures, creating an electronic bait that misleads Russian radars. The sole intent: to draw the attention of the 96 L6E radar cluster and a Panzer S-1 battery emplaced at Shebekino, less than approximately 11.2 miles from the Belgorod Dam. Flying between 492 to 656 feet altitude, the 2 UJ-22 decoys close on the Russian base at sustained speeds of 68 to 81 miles per hour, just enough to mimic the flight profile of a Neptune cruise missile. Each UAV is programmed to continuously emit electromagnetic signatures that replicate radar reflective patterns, RCS 5.38 to 6.46 square feet approach velocity, and the infrared signature of a Neptune warhead in terminal flight. An integrated active jamming package aboard the UAV simulates mid-course guidance signals plus an active radar seeker return, fooling both X-band and S-band trackers. At 3:08:54 a.m., a Russian 96L6E radar detects the signature and classifies it as an approaching Neptune from the northwest. Immediately, a Pantsir S-1 battery on alert 1.2 kilometers from the target is switched to automatic tracking. All launch tubes and the 30mm cannons pivot toward the northwest, precisely the vector the decoy UAVs are inviting. The Pantsir S-1 locks onto the false target with millimeter-wave radar control, exactly as Ukraine planned. At that moment, while the Pantsir family concentrates its fire northwest, 6 GMLR's rounds slice across the bends of the Seversky Donets, now less than 5.6 miles from the target. They fly at ultra-low altitude, only 148 to 197 feet, hugging the terrain to evade radar detection. All GNSS guidance was turned off at border crossing. Navigation is now handled by active terrain profile radar and inertial navigation, INS. Each round travels at Mach 3.0, roughly approximately 2,282 miles per hour, closing on the target like silent blades in the dark. 03:06:01 a.m. at approximately 1.86 miles out, the terrain profiling systems kick in. Algorithms immediately refine trajectories, adjusting impact angles to achieve near-perpendicular strikes approximately 85 to 90 degrees on the dam crest, where reinforced concrete density is highest and shock convergence is strongest. Here would allow hydraulic pressure from the reservoir to propagate and rip open cracks, triggering cascading hydrostatic failure. 03:06:50 a.m. 6 rounds sweep the river's narrowest stretch, the channel between the rugged banks by the village of Yarova and the hills southwest of Sviatohirsk. The Russian air defense network is effectively blinded. The only remaining defensive links are rear Tor M2 and Pantsir S-1 units, but they lack engagement solutions at ultra-low altitudes. Just 15 seconds remain before the dam's body could be torn apart by 6 penetrator warheads arriving at Mach 3. In the Pantsir S-1 control cabin, a junior-grade lieutenant notices the danger. On the infrared monitor, 6 tiny bright blips flash. Too fast, too close. Another officer shouts in vain, "That's not a Neptune, that's HIMARS." But it is already too late. Interceptor munitions were exhausted. The system is reloading and will not be ready for at least 15 seconds. 03:07:05 a.m. The first impact, round number 1, slams into the dam crest at the central spillway control area. A blinding white flash, followed by the detonation of hundreds of kilograms of penetrative explosives ripping through over 3.94 feet of reinforced concrete. 0.2 seconds later, the second round penetrates at the right edge, near the maintenance staircase and machinery chamber. Sparks erupt. A massive slab of concrete is hurled tens of meters into the air. Then the third, fourth, fifth rounds follow. The entire dam structure shudders as if awakened by an earthquake. 03:07:08 a.m. The final, 6th round tears into the reinforced axis of the left spillway valve, detonating inside the steel structure designed to withstand hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of water daily. But this time, the pressure comes not from water, but from penetration and fire. Each GMLRS-ER carries 200 pounds of penetrative explosive. The 6 strikes deliver a cumulative approximately 1,204 pounds of shaped charge explosive into a single critical point. The dam's structure begins to fail. A long metallic cracking sound, like steel being bent, echoes through the control room. The first fissure appears, running laterally from the third impact across the dam face. Water pressure starts to bleed through hairline cracks, at first a trickle, but within 4 seconds it turns into a white writhing torrent that rips at shattered concrete. 3:07:14 a.m., the dam breaches. Just 1.5 seconds later, the entire upstream embankment collapses. A vertical wall of water thunders downstream like a freed beast. A plume exceeding 98 feet erupts skyward. Over 530 million U.S. gallons of stored water surges downstream at speeds up to 43.5 miles per hour, carrying mud, rock, concrete fragments, and hydraulic shock waves. 2.4 kilometers downstream at the Russian field logistics base. The northern Lyman Forest edge houses more than 80 troops, mostly logistics technicians, tanker drivers, and ammunition handlers sleeping in temporary tents. A few remain on watch or smoking after their shift. Within 5 seconds, the initial surge sweeps away 3 Ural 4320 trucks parked near the bank as if they were tin toys. Satellite dish masts collapse. The military mobile comms mast is swept away with its steel frame. An electronics bunker floods within 20 seconds, cutting all battlefield communications across northwest Donetsk. An officer screams into a dead radio, "We've lost everything! Re-establish the defensive line. Anyone hear me?" 03:08:00 a.m. Less than a minute later, the entire base is underwater. Ukrainian recon UAVs continue to circle silently, recording the devastation, preparing the strategic report that will shock the Russian General Staff within hours. 03:25 a.m. The Southern Military District Command Center in Rostov-on-Don lights up with dozens of alert signals. On control screens, icons representing UAVs, logistics vehicles, and forward radars flip to no contact. The supply corridor from north of Lyman to East Sloviansk, the same sector that saw heavy fighting yesterday, abruptly falls off the operational map. All communications from the Volodymyrivka rear base are severed. 03:34 a.m. An urgent report is relayed directly to the Russian General Staff. A red headline on the operational telegram reads, "Complete loss of logistics base Volkostia due to hydrologic incident level 1." The body of the message freezes the command. 8 Ural 4320 military trucks, 2 KAMAZ 43,114 command vehicles, 4 KAMAZ 5350 fuel tankers, all swept away. Communications gear, ammunition stores, UAV hangars, wiped out. Casualties cannot be tallied yet, but initial estimates put losses at no fewer than approximately 80 personnel. 03:37 a.m. observation post number 5 near Bilohorivka, which monitors the logistic raft crossings, transmits a final thermal image. One large heat patch dispersing, the last remnant of an Ural truck being dragged away, its engine still burning. The feed then dies. At the front, Russian artillery units waiting for resupply are unaware their rear base has been erased from the map. 03:45 a.m. in Rostov-on-Don, the Southern MD command shifts to tactical alert. Within 30 minutes of the dam failure, at least 3 major riverine supply routes along the Siversky Donets are marked temporarily unsafe. Russian engineer units are ordered to conduct immediate terrain surveys, damage assessments, and provisional restoration plans. A sappers detachment with floating bridge gear, hydrotechnical repair teams, and field pumping units are dispatched from Shebekino and Stary Oskol. 4:10 a.m., an urgent internal bulletin from Emercom states, the downstream sections of the Siversky Donets from North Volodymyrivka to southwest Sviatohirsk experienced extreme hydraulic shock, with flows exceeding 43.5 miles per hour during the first 2 minutes. Riverbank structures, riverside roads, and temporary logistics infrastructure are likely 30 to 70% destroyed. The Russian Ministry of Defense immediately requests satellite imagery from Barzem and Resurs-P platforms and ground station telemetry, but heavy cloud cover and electromagnetic disruption from flares and tactical UAV activity render much of the data unusable in real time. Over the next 24 to 72 hours, Russian units near Vovchansk Lyman and northwest Sloviansk will face acute supply interruptions, notably in artillery shells, fuel, and medical supplies. Temporary bridges and minor dam crossing routes are destroyed, forcing Russian forces to rely on pontoon bridges or airlift, increasing airspace pressure along the logistics axis. A number of small resupply UAVs are trialed from Belgorod, but their throughput is severely limited. If reservoir levels remain critically low and the main dam cannot be restored quickly, the southern riverside of Sviatohirsk will undergo permanent geomorphologic change, impacting all wheeled logistics from fuel tankers to self-propelled guns. Mud, boulders, and debris will block rapid re-establishment of former routes. Motor pools, field refueling sites, and UAV hubs will need full relocation. Any attempt to rebuild the old line will take at least 5 to 7 days, while combat operations continue. This was not a conventional artillery barrage or a standard UAV raid, yet the hydrologic trap's effect is campaign shaping. Within 2 minutes, Ukraine transformed a hydraulic work into a weapon comparable in destructive effect to several dozen HIMARS strikes when measured by equipment losses and supply disruption. If Ukraine continues to replicate this pattern, striking geographic and engineering vulnerabilities, Russia's logistics network across Donetsk-Luhansk will constantly risk sudden fragmentation even without protracted firefights. That is the operational intelligence and the tactical cunning behind Ukraine's hydro strike. At exactly 1:02 a.m. local time on November 2, 2025, at a concealed launch site on the edge of Mykolaiv Oblast, the entire Ukrainian strike crew had completed the loading sequence. 2 Flamingo cruise missiles, each carrying a warhead weighing more than 2,200 pounds and equipped with INS guidance and anti-jamming systems, were now in launch position. They carried a strategic mission: destroy the Tuapse oil export port, a logistical artery that brings Russia over $6 billion per year, pumping the lifeblood that keeps its war-strained and sanctions-struck economy barely alive. A strike here would not only cripple a strategic energy hub, but also deliver a direct blow to the very war budget Moscow relies on to sustain its invasion. Inside the command center, live imagery from a Beaver reconnaissance UAV appeared on the main display. The pier zone, where towering distillation columns were operating at maximum capacity. None of them knew tonight would be different, because Ukraine was about to deliver a devastating surprise. Those manifold pipelines pumping 240,000 barrels of oil per day would become instruments of death within minutes. And the 2 Flamingo missiles on their way were not alone. Once launched, they would need roughly 32 minutes to reach the target, more than enough time for Russian radar to detect and intercept them. Ukraine had calculated everything. Earlier, at 12:35 a.m., from a mobile launcher on the Kherson front, 12 UJ-22 drones had quietly taken off, flying in a dispersed low formation at altitudes under 165 feet, skimming the western coastline near Tuapse. Their mission was not only reconnaissance, they were also kamikaze assets meant to draw the full attention of Russian air defenses, clearing a path for the Flamingo missiles approaching from the north, along a terrain-hugging route that bypassed radar checkpoints and headed straight for the deep-water terminal, soon to be engulfed in flames. At 1:15 a.m., the UJ-22 drones completed their approach arc. Now, only 23.6 miles from the target, they began entering the coverage zone of Russian air defense radar. As predicted, faint red blips began appearing on the Tuapse Port Coordination Center's radar display. First 3, then 5. Within 6 seconds, the entire southwest quadrant of Tuapse was flooded with 12 faint radar returns spread like a fan-shaped formation, heading straight for the port. Their radar cross-section, RCS, of 0.08 to 0.1 square meters placed them below the typical cruise missile alert threshold. This time, the duty officer didn't dismiss them. After several costly mistakes in previous weeks, he was more cautious, analyzing the pattern carefully. But just seconds after appearing, the blips began breaking formation. Some drones rose slightly, others dipped, mimicking the chaotic movement of seabirds caught in coastal winds. On the 1RS-2-1E radar screen, their flight paths were no longer linear. They fluctuated irregularly, with turn angles shifting 3 to 5 degrees per second. After a brief hesitation, lasting exactly 4.2 seconds, the radar officer finally typed a classification command. Classify bird cluster, low priority. A fatal mistake, one he would pay for dearly. At 1:22:48 a.m., when the bird cluster was less than 9.3 miles from Manifold Pier number 4, the 1RS-2-1E radar finally acquired a stable reflection cycle. I reclassified the targets. Reclassification UAV, tactical class, low RCS. Immediately, an alarm blared through the Pantsir cabin. Without waiting for authorization, the Pantsir battery near Pier 165 launched two 57E-6E missiles toward the sea-skimming drones. Further north, a Book M2 battery locked on and launched 3 more. 5 missiles, each nearly $1 million, were fired at drones worth only a few $1,000s apiece. After nearly a minute of chaotic engagement, Russian air defenses finally downed 4 drones. But the nightmare had only begun. The radar signatures, interference patterns, and reaction timing logged by the 12 UJ-22 drones had created a living battlefield map for the incoming missiles. Every blind spot, every delayed response, every noise corridor, all of it was captured, encoded, and transmitted in real time to the Ukrainian strike crew. The launch order was issued instantly. A short beep sounded. The hydraulic lift raised the 17-foot missile, sliding it off the protective rail into a 28-degree launch angle, optimal for low-altitude cruise. Seconds later, the Flamingo missile left the launcher, silent, carving a thin, cold trail as it dove towards southern Crimea, initiating one of the boldest precision strikes of 2025. They flew at 85 feet altitude, maintaining a cruise speed of 550 miles per hour. At Pier 167 of the Tuapse port complex, the largest crude oil receiving zone, 2 massive tankers, MT Chai and Coast Buster, Liberia flagged, were waiting to take on their final batches of fuel. Beside Chai, at the standby berth, the Pollux, Panama flag, lay idle, awaiting its turn. Together, they formed a perfect cluster of high-value targets. At 1:23:24 a.m., the remaining 8 UJ-22 drones closed in on the southern pier, where the tankers were berthed along piers 165 to 167. They were now within 985 yards of the objective. All had passed through the final layer of Russian air defenses. Each drone carried a 7.7-pound HEI, high-explosive incendiary warhead, designed to penetrate thin steel and ignite secondary fires. Each one was capable of punching through 0.4 to 0.6 inches of manifold pipe steel or foam station walls before triggering its incendiary core. At 1:23:28 a.m., all 8 UJ-2s simultaneously dipped their noses to -5 degrees, skimming just 20 to 26 feet above the water, hugging the edge of the concrete pier. Each drone's FLIR infrared camera locked onto thermal targets automatically, scanning for stable IR signatures. Once FLIR confirmed a target with over 98% confidence, the onboard controller activated kamikaze mode. 8 drones became 8 flying warheads. UJ-22 No. 1 struck the high-pressure manifold cluster feeding crude from storage 12B to the deep water berth. The 0.55-inch steel shell failed instantly. The explosion ruptured distribution valve No. 2, sending crude oil spraying like a fire hose beneath MT Chai's hull, igniting instantly as RDX fumes met hydrocarbon vapor. A 100-foot sheet of flame rolled across the deck, licking under Chai's port side without breaching the hull. UJ-22 No. 2 smashed into the foam system control shed beside the manifold. The blast destroyed the pressure module and central control cabinet, knocking the entire firefighting grid offline. UJ-22 No. 3 dived into the electrical dispatch cabin, controlling heat flow and SCADA sensors for the pier. The explosion burned through the control boards. Fiber lines snapped and melted. Every measurement channel across the pier went dark. UJ-22 No. 4 hit the flexible transfer hose coupling on Pollux, which was preparing to receive 45,000 tons of crude. The impact severed the secondary joint. Oil spilled across the pier, heated by the spreading manifold fire. The slick flowed eastward, visible later in Planet Labs' satellite imagery. UJ-22 No. 5 struck the return flow pipeline beneath Pier 167's concrete block deck. The explosion triggered a compressed vapor pocket detonation, cracking the deck by 12 inches. Pier 167 began tilting slightly, structurally compromised but still standing. UJ-22 No. 6 hit the auxiliary petrochemical module, where additives were mixed to lighten heavy crude. The fire spread to foam tanks containing amines and ethers, creating a secondary blaze with a blue-white flame. Practically invisible to optical detectors, fire crews would lose at least 90 seconds locating the source. UJ-22 No. 7 and No. 8 were shot down mid-air. The two tankers, MT Chai and Coastbuster, were now surrounded by fire, vapor, and cascading oil, but neither had been hit directly. Because they weren't meant to be destroyed by drones. They were meant for the Flamingo missiles, and in less than 60 seconds, two steel lances carrying 2,000-kilogram warheads would arrive. Only now did the Southern TUAP's Air Defense Command spot something wrong. Two faint radar signatures punching through the smoke layer at low altitude, bearing 226 degrees. A rapid alert went out, but too late. The nearest Pantsir S-1 had expended all its 57 E-6 interceptors fighting the UJ-22 swarm 3 minutes earlier. The Tor M2 battery north of the port still had missiles, but could not pivot the launcher fast enough. Flamingo's angle of attack was too low, slipping through a blind corridor between technical buildings. The Buck M2 battery on the city's outskirts never received targeting data. Its 9S-36 radar failed to lock on in time. A multi-million-dollar air defense network could do nothing. Not because it didn't detect the missiles, but because it had no missiles left. At 1:23:49 a.m., Flamingo 1 and Flamingo 2 entered their terminal dive at over 528 miles per hour. On the FLIR feed from a Ukrainian UAV, two thin streaks of fire sliced across the pier. Flamingo 1 skimmed the burning manifold line beneath MT Chai, then angled down into the connector hub leading to tank number 2. 1.7 seconds later, internal pressure skyrocketed. A BLEVE, boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, tore the tanker open from within. A white fireball, towering over 590 feet, erupted into the night, bright enough to cast shadows across the northern container yard for 3 full seconds. Almost simultaneously, Flamingo 2 punched through the smoke layer, banked slightly past Technical Station Number 3, and dove into the aft deck of the Coastbuster, a Shadow Fleet tanker flying the Bahamas flag. The missile penetrated the main engine compartment, where FO fuel and the oil conditioning system were housed. The blast tore apart the diesel complex, triggering a chain reaction fire that raced backward into the auxiliary chemical storage, igniting everything. Flames spread across the ship in under 25 seconds. Dark blue and gray-yellow smoke spiraled upward in a twisting mushroom column. Both tankers were now fully engulfed. The spreading oil slick on the water ignited, racing from piers 166 to 167 across the entire southern basin. The hard booms meant to contain spills were blown away, completely useless. From orbit, the entire TUAP's bay became a sheet of fire. In less than 12 minutes, the fuel logistics backbone of the TUAP's oil terminal, Russia's primary Black Sea crude export hub, had been knocked offline. Material losses included 2 destroyed tankers, MT Chai, Liberia, and Coastbuster, Bahamas, 1 damaged vessel, Pollux, Panama. Severe destruction across manifold clusters, pipelines, pump stations, and technical facilities. A massive water surface fire generating black smoke columns exceeding 985 feet. Tuapse is not an ordinary oil terminal. It is Russia's strategic energy spearhead on the Black Sea, exporting over 240,000 barrels per day, about 8.5% of all seaborne Urals crude. With an annual capacity of over 12 million tons, Tuapse brings Russia hundreds of millions of dollars per month, money used to fund the war, pay soldiers, and keep the collapsing economy barely alive under sanctions. From here, oil flows to power plants in Turkey, heating systems in China, refineries in India, slipping quietly through sanction loopholes before returning as revenue that fuels the Kremlin. Ukraine knew this through satellite surveillance and HUMINT. They had monitored Tuapse for 6 months, and they chose not to wait until the oil left port or reached foreign buyers. They struck first, deep inside a fortress Russia believed untouchable, turning it into an inferno within minutes. With barely $1 million in expenditure, Ukraine inflicted more than $200 million in Russian losses. The attack crippled crude export capacity at Tuapse for 10 to 14 days at minimum. 2 Shadow Fleet tankers, MT Chai and Coastbuster, used to evade sanctions, were wiped out at the pier, impossible to cover up. This was a direct assault on Russia's covert maritime network. The oil slick, spreading across tens of thousands of square meters, appeared unmistakably on commercial satellite imagery, Planet Labs, making denial or claims of accidental fires impossible. Russia was forced to dispatch emergency response assets from Novorossiysk, tugs, fire control vessels, and heavy containment booms. This delayed the entire maritime logistics chain across Krasnodar, Novorossiysk, Sochi. 5 hours after the attack, major OSINT channels independently verified the strike, cross-referencing satellite photos, AIS logs, fire imagery, and radar emission data. Moscow remained silent for 36 hours. No incident report, no admission of attack, no official explanation. A clear sign of panic and an attempt to conceal the scale of the damage. This strike became a symbol of a new type of warfare where precision, deception, and intelligence allow a weaker force to outmaneuver advanced air defenses. From this night onward, no Russian port can sleep peacefully, because unmanned aerial vehicles and cruise missiles may come from anywhere. At 2:41 a.m. on December 4, 2025, at the Kacha Air Base in northwestern Crimea, the Russian MiG-29 with tail number Red 24 had just touched down after a sortie lasting more than 3 hours, its mission being to strike Ukrainian civilians in a residential area near Novozern, north of Kherson, a region repeatedly targeted by Russian air raids. The 2 pilots stepped out of the cockpit with a relaxed mindset, preparing to celebrate the successful mission. On the apron below, the MiG-29 was still radiating intense heat, its engines not yet cooled after the long sortie. And perhaps they would never cool down again, because a brutal retaliation had already been set in motion. From more than 37 miles away, out over the Black Sea, a flight of 4 UJ-25 Skyline drones from Ukraine was racing just above the water, heading straight toward the western Crimean coast, home to the Kacha Air Base and a cluster of low-altitude radars around Simferopol. These 4 drones carried one mission: locate and destroy the MiG-29 worth more than $30 million, the same aircraft that had just finished attacking Ukrainian civilians, and ensure its crew would never again have the chance to carry out another massacre. In addition, they were tasked with crippling the Irtysh radar near Simferopol, a system designed specifically to track low-altitude targets such as UAVs, helicopters, strike aircraft, and Ukrainian cruise missiles. The 2 targets were nearly 37 miles apart, but they shared one thing in common: Both lay deep inside what Russia believed to be a safe zone, an area where Ukrainian UAVs supposedly could not reach. For more than 370 miles prior, the drone formation had flown in complete radio silence, hugging the coastline, slipping beneath civilian air corridors. They exploited every tiny gap in Russia's radar network, gaps charted by HUR analysts after months of data collection to get within striking distance. At 2:50 a.m., the four UJ-25s reached their split point. The navigation algorithm instantly divided them into two independent strike groups. K1 and K2 turned southwest toward Kacha Air Base. I-1 and I-2 banked southeast, descending toward the area near Simferopol, where the Irtysh radar sat beside a joint military-civilian airfield. Their flight paths were sharp, jagged zigzags, drawn using terrain profiles, earth curvature, radar blind spots, and even the habitual on-off behavior of Russian surveillance stations observed over months. Inside a bunker near Kiev, a young officer performed a final check of the deviation table. The error from the optimal path was less than 3 feet. Everything was unfolding exactly as in the hundreds of simulations. When the drones were still 31 miles away, Russia's coastal Podlet K1 radar finally detected them. On the screen, the night duty operator saw a few faint blips appear and vanish. Estimated speed: 340 to 370 miles per hour. Altitude: extremely low. If this had been a Su-30 or MiG-31, he would have immediately called headquarters. But the blips were weak, jittery. They looked exactly like sea clutter. He wrote "spurious target," then deleted it. That moment was the one rare chance Russia had to detect the 4 UJ-25 Skylines carrying death toward Crimea. These drones were single-use jet UAVs built from fiberglass and carbon fiber, with virtually no metallic surfaces. At 31 miles, their radar cross-section was less than 10% of a normal fighter aircraft. They continued forward without encountering any further threat. At 12 miles to target, Russian Air Defense Command finally realized the incoming objects were not seabirds, not wave clutter, but a genuine threat. Appearing simultaneously from 2 different directions, the drones forced the commander to change tactics immediately, abandoning ground radar locks and switching to track via missile, Russia's method for engaging very small targets that radars cannot classify. In this mode, the missile's seeker itself must acquire and chase the target. From 2 positions near Sevastopol and Simferopol, 4 9M96E 2 surface-to-air missiles, each worth about $4 million ignited and streaked into the night sky. These were not ordinary SAMs. The 9M96E2 was designed specifically to kill small, maneuvering targets. It could pull 60 G, change direction almost instantly, and adjust trajectory within fractions of a second. But Ukraine had already anticipated this. The moment the seekers began detecting faint reflections off the UJ-25's carbon fiber bodies, the drones reacted with 2 different evasion patterns. Toward Kacha, K1 and K2 simultaneously dropped altitude, diving close to the ground and forcing the missiles into extreme negative angles, an environment in which the 9M96E2 often becomes unstable due to dense, turbulent airflow. Toward Simferopol, I-1 and I-2 executed hard lateral turns, creating curved flight paths that threw off the missile interception algorithms within seconds. The missiles tried to chase, but the constant changes in input data forced their seekers to recalculate trajectories again and again. Once the tracking angle exceeded the missile's limits, its control fins no longer had stable airflow to generate corrective force. That moment marked the onset of aerodynamic stall. All 4 missiles lost stability, shuddered, then plummeted into the ground and exploded. Within a few short minutes, millions of dollars in missiles had been defeated by targets costing only tens of thousands. At this point, Russian command understood that the mid-tier air defense layer had been breached, and they had only one option left: fall back to the terminal air defense layer, where the Pantsir systems were positioned. In both sectors, Kacha and Simferopol, Russia had deployed 2 Pantsir S, 1 batteries each, arranged in a box formation with overlapping coverage. Any UAV entering one corner of the kill zone would be exposed to crossfire from at least 2 gun crews. Pantsir did not operate like the S-300 or S-400. Its philosophy was detect, fire one, observe, correct, fire again. At the Kacha axis, the Western Panzer unit picked up a weak signal from K-1 first. The track was unstable, but the gunner launched a 57 E-6 missile anyway. Because the radar cross-section of the UJ-25 was so small, the system had to rely almost completely on predicted vectors to maintain tracking. But just as the missile calculated the intercept point, K-1 and K-2 both initiated a wagon wheel maneuver, a spiraling rotation around a forward point while still advancing toward the target. The constant changes in angle of approach caused the 57 E-6's seeker to lose the ability to compute an intersection. The missile overshot K-1, detonating off-target and leaving nothing more than a brief flare in the darkness above the sea. Realizing he could not maintain a stable lock, the Panzer gunner immediately switched to the second method, firing the 30mm autocannons at nearly 5,000 rounds per minute. He didn't attempt to aim precisely at each UAV. That was impossible. Instead, he created a dense block of ballistic fire directly along their axis of approach. K-2 was struck by several rounds, its wing torn apart. It crashed onto a grassy patch a few hundred feet from the runway. And a new problem instantly emerged. The shattered carbon fragments from K-2 reflected radar waves as hundreds of separate points. On the Russian radar screen, instead of 2 UAV signals, the display now resembled a cloud of noise. Distinguishing the real UAV from debris was nearly impossible. K-1 used the confusion to break left sharply. It managed to enter striking range of the MiG-29 before the gunner could reacquire lock. Meanwhile, at the Simferopol axis, I-1 and I-2 broke through the Pantsir zone amid a similar chaos. The moment the last 57 E-6 detonated off a hillside and the streams of 30mm fire drifted outside their effective envelope, the 2 UJ-25s dropped to less than 165 feet, hugging the treetops. Directly ahead was their target, a radar installation Russia trusted absolutely, the Irtish system, responsible for monitoring the entire low-altitude band around Simferopol, where every previous Ukrainian UAV had been detected and destroyed. Tonight, it had become the prey. The remaining 3 UJ-25s were now entering their final attack phase. Inside the Kiev bunker, the infrared feed from K-1 sharpened. There, on the parking apron, the MiG-29 sat motionless. Its metal airframe radiated intense heat, the IR signature revealing the contours of the nose, wings, and tail. The UJ-25's automated system immediately marked the target. MiG-29, priority target number 1. A small message appeared on the interface. IR signature acquired. Priority target. K-1 held an altitude of 138 feet, speed stable at 382 miles per hour, and switched to terminal attack mode. 3.5 seconds later, K-1 slammed into the MiG-29's left flank, right at hardpoint number 3. A blast erupted, followed by a flash, and flames shot outward like a fan. The thermite core burned at 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, melting through the airframe alloy almost instantly. The heat triggered a violent reaction inside the left wing's fuel tank, blowing apart the outer skin. The MiG-29, a fighter worth more than $30 million, was completely erased by a drone costing only a fraction of that. Kacha was engulfed in fire, thick smoke rising across the entire apron. Fire crews rushed in, but just as they arrived, the MiG-29's auxiliary fuel tank detonated again, forcing them back dozens of meters. The airfield commander ordered the entire runway shut down. fearing more UAVs might strike technical areas or fuel depots. Within minutes, nearly every defensive system at Kacha descended into chaos. While Kacha burned after the strike on the MiG-29, I-1 and I-2 entered their terminal phase against the Irtish SQ radar, the most critical low-altitude surveillance node around Simferopol. On I-1's infrared feed, the Irtish antenna appeared clearly, a nearly 40-foot metal frame rotating slowly every 10 seconds, emitting a distinct thermal signature. Behind the antenna was the control cabin. Its door was still open, and silhouettes were moving frantically inside. They had heard the explosion from Kacha but still didn't understand what was happening. FLIR marked the nodes. Primary node, antenna Irtish. Secondary node, processing cabin. At 300 meters, I-1 began its dive, accelerating to 388 miles per hour. The camera shook slightly as the angle steepened. In the final 0.2 seconds, the entire frame contained nothing but the Irtish antenna, enlarged like a towering steel machine. Impact. The thermite warhead burned through the antenna's base, destroying its rotation assembly and causing the entire structure to collapse toward the control cabin. Inside, the radar screens went dark instantly. The system was dead. Moments later, I-2 struck from a supplementary angle, smashing into the signal processing block behind the antenna. A second explosion tore through the module, destroying the power systems and data links. The entire technical site shuddered, cabin lights flickered, then went out completely, the power grid severed at its core. The Irtish SQ, Russia's low-altitude eye over Crimea, was wiped out in seconds. Within just a few minutes, Russia had lost a MiG-29 and an Irtish radar, two critical assets for low-altitude air defense, leaving Crimea's surveillance network partially paralyzed, no longer able to determine where the UAVs were or what might come next. The MiG-29 was not just an expensive fighter. It was the base's only quick-reaction aircraft, always kept in a standby state, ready to roll onto the runway and take off in the shortest possible time. Its destruction meant Kacha instantly lost a rapid response interceptor and the entire suite of weapons and aviation equipment mounted beneath its fuselage and wings. More importantly, Kacha lost its ability to intercept medium-range UAVs approaching from the northwestern axis of Crimea, forcing Russia to redeploy aircraft from other bases such as Belbek or Saki. This triggered a chain reaction across the region's alert and patrol schedules. The replacement cost was not simply the 30 to 35 million USD price of a MiG-29 airframe, but the strategic cost of losing readiness at the exact moment Ukraine proved it could infiltrate deep into Crimea. Just to restore Kacha's normal alert cycle would take Russia at least several weeks. Meanwhile, the Irtish SKU was one of the most dangerous radar systems for Ukrainian UAVs. With Irtish destroyed, a 37 to 50-mile low-altitude gap around Simferopol opened immediately. Panzer and Tor batteries in the region no longer had targeting data to work with. The entire air defense network was forced to rely on radar stations positioned farther away, with greater delay and less optimal viewing angles. Civil aviation at Sevastopol was temporarily halted. Coastal surveillance systems switched to temporary blind mode to avoid cross-interference and false positive targets. Electronic warfare, EW units, were ordered to expand jamming coverage, but this only worsened the situation. Radars struggled to distinguish between their own jamming signals and actual targets. What worried Moscow most after these two attacks was the message Ukraine had sent. It could pierce every Russian air defense layer, choose any target inside Crimea, and strike it accurately with low-cost UAVs, while Russia's billion-dollar air defense network could not respond in time. What Russia once believed was impossible had occurred in a single night. The supposedly airtight air defense shield was riddled with holes, and Ukraine demonstrated that those holes could be exploited methodically. From that moment forward, every Russian plan to use Crimea as a safe zone for its air force and air defense units had to be reconsidered. because the attacker had not only knocked on the door, it had stepped inside and destroyed two vital assets at the heart of the base. At exactly 9:12 a.m. on October 22, 2025, on the COMAD screen of Ukraine's 132nd Independent Reconnaissance Battalion, the video feed streamed from a Lelika 100 UAV flying at more than 3,280 feet clearly revealed sharp thermal signatures on the move. They were the same soldiers who had executed civilians 2 days earlier in the village of Kucheriv Yar, killing 3 people and injuring 1. At this moment, the battalion commander needed no further reports. The order was issued immediately. Activate the 3-layer attack plan, with priority given to capturing the enemy alive. The operation had to be launched quickly because just 20 minutes earlier, Ukraine's electronic warfare system intercepted a Russian radio transmission. An order from a local commander telling his troops to withdraw from the Kucheriv Yar area convinced Ukraine would soon hunt them down. And he was right, except his order came too late, arriving exactly when Ukraine had already moved a mixed 122mm and 155mm artillery battery to the western edge of the forest, where Russian troops were still scattered and completely unaware of the command to retreat. The EW team, immediately after detecting the urgent Russian transmission, locked down the entire UHF/VHF spectrum being used by Russian forces in the area. From this moment forward, Russian troops were essentially cut off from rear-line command. Their internal communications collapsed. They were like a pack of wolves, suddenly separated from their alpha, unaware that danger was closing in from all sides. At exactly 9:25 a.m., the commander of the 132nd Independent Reconnaissance Battalion gave the order. All batteries stand by, HE rounds, fire by cluster. Barely 20 seconds later, the 122mm and 155mm artillery crews of the 41st Artillery Brigade, positioned on 2 forest edges, simultaneously loaded their guns. The command screen trembled as the first recoil thundered through the forest. The opening shells left their barrels, arcing straight toward Kucheriv Yar. Within the first 60 seconds, more than 12 shells struck precisely on the pre-marked targets. The dirt road leading into the village was shredded into craters. A truck carrying artillery rounds exploded and toppled onto its side. The entire supply route into the village was sealed shut. Ukraine knew this road was the only escape and resupply corridor the Russians relied on, and therefore destroyed it first. The moment the final artillery salvo ended, before Ukrainian infantry could even advance, a swarm of FPV drones launched from camouflaged platforms positioned secretly around the village. Without giving Russian troops a chance to recover, the drones shot off the ground like an angry swarm, accelerating brutally through the lingering haze of artillery smoke. Each frame vibrated as its 2,800 to 3,200 kilovolt motor hit maximum output. The 7 to 10-inch airframes carried compact HE warheads, small, but more than capable of punching through any target exposed by the artillery barrage with a single devastating strike. Each drone received live targeting coordinates from the Lelika UAV, auto-corrected its flight path, and pre-locked onto a specific target deep inside the village, locations where Russian troops believed they were hiding in a safe nest, preparing to withdraw quietly without anyone noticing. At 9:32 a.m., multiple precise explosions detonated across the village, slamming into every previously marked position. An 82mm mortar was obliterated instantly. A Russian dugout was hit directly at its entrance, wiping out the entire crew. Within seconds, the strongest Russian firing positions were erased, outer guard posts annihilated, and every escape route severed. As soon as the last blast faded, Ukrainian infantry surged into the village, storming abandoned houses where Russian troops were trying to hold out. While infantry closed in, the remaining FPV drones acted like finishing hammers. Whenever they spotted a pocket of resistance, they dived straight in and ended it with a pinpoint explosion. In a remarkably short time, most of Russia's outer defensive positions were neutralized, leaving gaps that Ukraine immediately seized. Once major Russian firing points fell silent, the commander of the 132nd Battalion shifted the objective: capture as many alive as possible. A Ukrainian team carrying a loudspeaker advanced and broadcast in clear Russian. "Kucherev Yar is fully surrounded. Drop your weapons, walk out unarmed. You will be treated under the Geneva Conventions." Facing a choice between dying meaninglessly inside a collapsing safe house or surrendering with a chance of survival, many Russian soldiers dropped their weapons and slowly emerged from their shelters. Some still resisted, but as they witnessed their comrades not being executed, their will to fight crumbled. A few even waved white cloths in surrender. By around 11 a.m., more than 50 Russian soldiers had been captured, awaiting transfer to the rear. For a small village, that number alone revealed how heavily the Russians had garrisoned the area and how decisively Ukraine's raid had succeeded. Kucherev Yar was officially liberated. On the rooftops of shattered homes, the Ukrainian flag was raised once again, not merely as a marker of regained territory, but as a resolute declaration to every Russian position on the front. Ukraine will never show mercy to those who fire upon civilians. The operation lasted only a few hours, but carried immense strategic and symbolic weight, a precise, uncompromising response to the war crime committed just 48 hours earlier. But unwilling to accept the loss of a key position, only a few days later, when shifting weather blanketed the entire Pokrovsk-Shakhov region in dense fog, reducing UAV visibility to just 980 to 1,640 feet. Russia believed Ukrainian commanders were preoccupied fortifying Kucherev Yar, leaving defenses temporarily thin elsewhere. Without hesitation, at 5:30 a.m. on October 25, 2025, Russia launched a new assault with 6 armored personnel carriers, including at least 1 new pattern turtle tank, leading the formation. The mechanized column moved silently, lights off, hugging the forest edge and using the fog to avoid detection. Their objective was clear: advance straight toward Shakhov, a small village with a uniquely critical tactical position. On the map, Shakhov sits along a route that, if retaken by Russia, would allow them to drive a wedge deep into Ukrainian defensive lines, split Ukrainian units defending Pokrovsk, threaten the entire western logistics corridor, and open a pathway to pressure Pokrovsk from the south-southeast. In Russian operational thinking, this wasn't merely a counterattack. It was an attempt to regain strategic initiative across the Donetsk region. Throughout the approach, the Russian convoy encountered no warning signs. No Ukrainian UAV overhead, no long-range artillery strikes, no hints of infantry reconnaissance teams waiting in ambush. The dense fog made them feel safe. The convoy continued along a dirt track toward a small bridge east of Pankivka, the one safe route Russia believed Ukraine had not secured. After moving nearly 2.8 miles, the convoy finally reached the bridge, only to find warped steel beams dangling over broken sections of collapsed roadway. In an instant, the convoy slammed on the brakes. Soldiers jumped out in panic. With no bridge, they would be forced to return to base, halt the attack, or cross the dangerous river ahead to complete their mission. Bound by the High Command's orders, the convoy commander gripped his handset and made a decision he would regret minutes later. Lead tank into the river. And that was exactly what Ukraine had been waiting for. Because the riverbed at this time of year was a perfect trap, mud nearly 1.5 feet deep, rapid currents from early season rainfall, and steep banks on both sides, enough to swallow any armored vehicle attempting to cross. Russian troops believed they were exploiting the fog to secretly approach Shakhov. In reality, they had walked straight into a kill zone pre-marked by Ukrainian reconnaissance. A narrow river, soft bottom, strong currents, and easily sealed at both ends. And Ukraine knew all of it. The moment the lead turtle tank reached mid-river, disaster struck. The wet mud clamped onto the tracks, dragging the entire front end downward. Within seconds, water rose past half the vehicle's height, and the engine roared helplessly. The commander immediately signaled an emergency order to the vehicles behind, "Reverse," but it was already too late. In the dense fog, the command never reached the entire formation. All 6 vehicles were already in the river, their tracks and wheels caught simultaneously in the slurry-like mud as if in a natural trap. The first BMP slipped left, tilting 30 degrees, water flooding into the compartment. The second MTLB tried to brake but was pushed downward by the vehicle behind. 2 BTR-82A lost traction entirely, their front wheels buried in deep mud. Another BMP rotated sideways, blocking the retreat of the entire column behind it. Within 20 seconds, Russia's entire river crossing line collapsed into total chaos. Now, the Russian convoy was no longer an attacking spearhead, but a wounded beast, stuck, immobile, and drowning in despair. And this wasn't even the worst part, because Ukraine had calculated everything. There wasn't a single Russian outpost within 12.4 miles. The crossing point was more than 5 to 5.5 miles from the nearest settlement. They were completely cut off from any support network. And that was the exact moment Ukraine had been waiting for. From a camouflaged launch site nearly 2,625 feet from the riverbank, 4 FPV drones lifted off in an arcing formation, each carrying a small PG-7VL anti-armor warhead mounted on an upgraded airframe. FPV number 1 locked onto the turtle tank, buried halfway into the mud. FPV number 2 and number 3 headed for 2 BMPs with twisted frames. FPV number 4 curved left, aiming straight at the BTR-82A stuck and blocking the retreat path. The countdown timer appeared. 20 seconds, 10 seconds. In the final dive, they simultaneously accelerated to 75 miles per hour and surged toward their targets. FPV number 1 struck the left flank of the turtle tank, the thinnest armor point. The engine hatch blew off. Part of the hull shifted several inches, and mud and metal blasted nearly 10 feet into the air. The turtle tank was neutralized on the spot. FPV number 2 chose a downward approach angle of 15 degrees, the perfect trajectory for a PG-7VL, to pierce the engine block of the BMP listing to its right. Distance, only 130 feet. The BMP tried revving its engine, but the tracks only spun uselessly in the mud. It was a stationary target. FPV number 2 lowered its nose and struck the thinnest armor plate above the engine block. The shaped-charged jet blasted straight into the engine compartment, tearing the entire block apart. Flames burst out through the ventilation slits, the maintenance hatch blowing open. FPV number 3 circled wide, locking onto the rear of the BMP, the weakest armor point. Distance closed rapidly. Just as the BMP tried to pivot, the FPV slammed into the rear door and detonated. The blast ripped the entire door off, hurling it several meters into the mud. Flames shot from the troop compartment, thick black smoke pouring out within seconds. FPV number 4 dove straight into the driver's cabin of the BTR-82A, whose front wheels were buried in mud. The PG-7VL warhead punched through and detonated the cabin. The windshield vanished, and the turret was kicked upward before crashing back into the mud. In less than 2 seconds, the only vehicle capable of forming even a temporary Russian defensive line was erased from the battlefield. Within a minute of the drone strike, Russia's entire armored formation had been reduced to mangled steel hulks sinking in a muddy riverbed. In just 4 days, the entire situation around Pokrovsk-Shakhov had transformed completely. The brutal attack on civilians on October 19th and the order "no one leaves the area" became the spark for a chain of strategic consequences Russia never anticipated. First came the fall of Kucherev Yar to Ukraine through a textbook operation that captured more than 50 Russian troops in a single morning. It wasn't just a tactical victory. It severed a key strategic junction, leaving Russia's eastern Pokrovsk defense cluster exposed on its flank. In an attempt to regain momentum, Russia launched a mechanized thrust toward Shakhov, yet at that exact moment, they walked straight into a pre-built Ukrainian kill zone that stripped Moscow of operational control over the southeastern Pokrovsk axis, the very mechanized push they hoped would break open Ukraine's defensive line. Ukraine delivered a strategic message. Every attack on civilians will be punished immediately, directly, and completely. Not through a press release or diplomatic statement, but through the charred wrecks lying in a riverbed and the Ukrainian flag raised once more on the rooftops of Kucheriv Yar. The Pokrovsk front line had been a grinding stalemate for months, yet in just a few days, Ukraine turned it into a strategic fracture point, forcing Russia to lose momentum and pull back into defensive posture. And it all began from a single Russian action, one that shattered every remaining moral boundary of the war. Ukraine offered only one answer: you fire on civilians. You don't get a second chance.